Welcome! Today we'll be looking at 3 hours of interesting mysteries and fan theories found within Elden Ring. For those looking for uninterrupted background noise, look no further. Also quickly before we begin, this channel is AI free with my friend and I running the channel. He does the bulk of the research and writing, and I voice, capture the footage, and edit the videos. So if you like what you see after watching, please consider subscribing. We'd really appreciate it. And, of course, for our regular viewers, we've got more videos coming this week. So, without further ado, please enjoy. What are Stakes of Marika actually anchored to? Stakes of Marika are one of the stranger constructs found in the Lands Between. Gameplay-wise, these carved statues act as mystical checkpoints, allowing a slain Tarnished to resurrect on the spot rather than back at a distant grace. But what in lore gives them this power? Each stake is a small effigy of Queen Marika herself, depicted with arms outstretched as if in welcome, and with a single long braid. Notably, Marika's lower body on the statue is entwined in golden roots or vines. This imagery is very deliberate. It hints that the stakes are anchored to the Erdtree's life-giving roots. The golden vines wrapping the statue suggest that the stake is drawing on the Erdtree's power of renewal. After all, the Erdtree is the source of immortality, or at least repeated birth in the Lands Between. Through Marika, the Erdtree's divine Empyrean vessel, that power is channeled into these smaller idols planted in the field. When a Tarnished falls in battle near a stake of Marika, lore-wise it's as if their spirit is caught by the stake's influence and rerouted into the Erdtree's grace before fully leaving the world. The Tarnished are sustained by grace, the golden light that gives life to you, as White Mask Vari put it. Normally, that grace pulls a fallen Tarnished back to the last site of grace. But a stake functions as a local conduit of Marika's grace. Marika's own divine essence seems to suffuse these statues, anchoring nearby souls to that spot. It's said that Marika is the eternal. Her influence permeates the land. In effect, the stakes of Marika serve as mini Erdtrees, localized fonts of the Erdtree's grace, by virtue of Marika's image and the golden root-like cords connecting them to the greater vitality of the Erdroot system. It's also telling that the stakes appear predominantly at sites of great danger, often outside boss arenas or deadly gauntlets. This supports the idea that they were erected by devout followers of Marika, or the Golden Order, in strategic locations to aid champions of the Erdtree. One theory is that during wartime, royal artificers placed stakes on the battlefield so that favored warriors could fall and rise again in service of the kingdom. The presence is effectively Marika watching over a perilous trial, granting worthy combatants repeated chances. The cruciform pose of the statue, arms outstretched, reinforces this notion of the goddess extending mercy and protection to those under her gaze. Though it is worth noting that this bears the resemblance of Marika shackled within the Erdtree that we find at the end of our journey. So an interesting thought there. But unlike the sites of grace, stakes of Marika have no sustained light of their own. They lie dormant until a death occurs nearby, at which point the stake offers resurrection. This suggests the stake activates by drawing directly from Marika's divine will at the moment of need. It doesn't guide the Tarnished forward like a site of grace does. Instead, it anchors the soul to that location so death isn't a setback. Put simply, the stake is a spiritual tether, so to speak. The golden root wrapping Marika's effigy could be interpreted as literally tethering that spot to the Erdtree's root system, ensuring any who fall there can be reborn from those roots, rather than having their spirit drift away. The lore doesn't spell out the stakes' creation in detail, but all evidence points to them being constructs of the Golden Order in Marika's likeness, imbued with the Erdtree's sacramental enchantments. Marika's role as the guardian of the Elden Ring, and by extension of life and death cycles, is key here. Remember that as long as the Elden Ring was intact and Marika's law held, true death was largely forbidden. After all, the Rune of Death was removed. Thus, those aligned with the Erdtree could always return in some form. The stakes simply capitalize on that fact in localized fashion. They anchor one's souls to a nearby point of Marika's grace, likely by virtue of ancient divine magic that the followers of the Golden Order learned from Marika or the Two Fingers. In essence, a stake of Marika is likely a miniature shrine to the goddess, one so potent that it can momentarily invoke Marika's immortality for any who perish in its sphere of influence. As it is, the stakes of Marika are anchored to Marika's own power in the Erdtree's roots. They serve as dispersed lifelines of grace, created to offer protection and convenience in the most perilous corners of the lands between. Whenever one finds comfort in a stake of Marika's glow after a brutal defeat, that is effectively Marika extending her arms, as carved on the statue, to cradle the fallen and lift them back to the battlefield. Sir Ansbach's past, the knight who feared a kind god. Sir Ansbach cuts a curious figure in the annals of the Shadow of the Erdtree, an aged knight with a fearsome reputation and an unexpectedly introspective mind. Long before he crossed paths with Leda, Ansbach was known as the feared commander of the Pureblood Knights in service of Lord Hewg. This detail is astonishing. Hewg's cabal of ominous blood-soaked warriors was not where one expected to find a thoughtful soul. But Ansbach was different. Even as a servant of Hewg, he harbored doubts about Hewg's bloody ambitions. In fact, lore reveals that Ansbach attempted to challenge Miquella at one point, hoping to break Hewg free of a spell or obsession. This is an intriguing twist. It suggests Ansbach perceived that Hewg was under some enchantment or delusion regarding Miquella. Ansbach thought that by confronting tender Miquella, he might release Hewg from that influence. But instead, Ansbach himself fell under Miquella's enchantment. Thus, Ansbach switched sides, albeit not by choice. He became one of the compatriots who followed Leda and Miquella into the realm of shadow. Described as a wise old man, Ansbach dedicated himself to investigating Miquella's purpose by studying the clues Miquella left behind, while others like Leda saw those crosses as sacred breadcrumbs to chase blindly. Ansbach approached them with curiosity and caution. Once Miquella's charm was broken, when Miquella abandoned his great rune, Ansbach's original will and memories flooded back. He recalls with some bitterness how he originally fought Miquella to free Hewg, but was outwitted and charmed. I believed with sufficient mastery, even an Empyrean would be within reach of my blade. I could not have been more mistaken. Miquella the Kind is a monster. Pure and radiant, he wields love to shrive clean the hearts of men. There is nothing more terrifying. This stunning line captures Ansbach's view. Miquella's benevolence is so absolute that it subjugates others just as effectively as any dark sorcery, yet in a far subtler way. Freed from enchantment, Ansbach does not react with Leda's fervor. Instead, he takes a path of measured reason. He treks to a place called the Specimen Storehouse, where he uncovers grim information. Hewg's corpse has been taken to Miquella, and worse, that Miquella intends to use Hewg's remains as a vessel for a king consort. Ansbach, armed with knowledge, partners with the Tarnished to piece together Miquella's true goal. Together, they deduce Miquella is heading for a tower of shadow, housing a divine gateway, a hidden path to true godhood, one that Marika herself even took part of. Ansbach reasons that Miquella is attempting to wholly dispossess himself of his flesh, divesting himself of his entire being, just to enter this gateway. With this, Ansbach marvels, and perhaps shudders, at the lengths Miquella will go, just to reach godhood, and to ascend beyond the Golden Order. Given Ansbach's reflective nature, it's little surprise that when Leda begins her purge, she targets him as a potential traitor. Leda accuses and tries to convince the Tarnished to attack Sir Ansbach. If the Tarnished defends Ansbach and he survives Leda's onslaught, he proves his loyalty to those who show him mercy. Ansbach will then assist the player in facing Leda and her fanatic allies. This outcome shows the depth of Ansbach's honor. Despite once being a fearsome blood knight, he doesn't hold a grudge, even against a Tarnished player who slew Hewg. In fact, before a later battle, Ansbach quietly tells the player he already knows that they killed Hewg, and he bears no grudge whatsoever, deeming Hewg's end an honorable one. It's honestly remarkable. The very man who served Hewg has come to accept Hewg's death as necessary, even just. This reflects Ansbach's evolution from a zealot of blood to a seeker of truth. And honestly just adds to why he's such a fucking badass. After Miquella and his new divine consort are confronted and presumably defeated at the saga's climax, Ansbach is found dying before the gate of divinity. His long quest ends not in glory, but in a quiet collapse once purpose is spent. Along with the rest of Miquella's warriors, we as the player were able to convince to part ways with the kind god. On his corpse is Ansbach's armor set, and if the player converse deeply with him, they'll carry the memory of his warnings. Ansbach's dying contribution was the mending rune of perfect order's philosophy. Not literal in this case, but unknowingly, Ansbach's skepticism towards gods aligns exactly with Goldmask's ideas. In his extensive dialogue, Ansbach questions the fickleness of the gods and notes that great evils may not exist in the Golden Order, except the ones human fanatics invent. He lamented how fundamentalists lost their way, and in a sense, he could be describing what happened to Leda and even to his younger self under Hewg. Ansbach's experiences led him to conclude that excessive devotion, whether to an evil god of blood or a kind god of light, can blind people and destabilize any order. The moniker some give Ansbach, the all-learning, is fitting. He is a living proof that a person can journey from one extreme to another and emerge with nuanced understanding. Imagine a knight of a dark cult who ends up effectively a collaborator with a scholar like Goldmask or Corrin. Well, Brother Corrin might be a bit of a reach, but you get the point. In this case, it's almost unheard. Yet, Ansbach's writings and words echo some of Goldmask's critiques of the Golden Order's failings. In one conversation, Ansbach muses that kindly Miquella makes my blood run cold, and calls him a monster precisely because Miquella's love is so perfect that it robs men of their will. Coming from someone who served a literal monster of blood, this is eye-opening. Ansbach effectively says a too perfect utopian vision can be as scary as open darkness. His unique perspective is invaluable in the lore. It reminds us that the Golden Order and its insurgents, like Miquella, aren't simply good versus evil. There are shades of gray, and the ones like Ansbach, who sees both sides, can articulate the flaws in each. Sir Ansbach's past, a veteran of bloody wars, a defector enchanted by grace, a repentant, mentor-like figure, enriches the Elden Ring narrative by providing a voice of reason amid zealotry. His very presence also reinforces that men can come from all kinds of backgrounds, yet find new purpose under grace, or of their own volition. In Ansbach's case, his purpose became not to fight for another lord blindly, but to ensure the truth of Miquella's designs was known and to choose his allegiance with eyes open. That is why, in the end, he sides with the player if they've earned his trust. He views on the Order, both golden and perspective, are both summarized in his weary words. I'd rather not volunteer service to a new master unless I know I can be of use. I presume you, too, are keen to know just what kind Miquella is doing here. Ansbach emphasizes understanding over blind faith, and as he uncovers Miquella's final plan, he even admires the ambition, but is unafraid to call out its terrifying aspect. Few characters are so frank about the fundamental forces at play. In sum, Sir Ansbach stands as a mirror to Leda. Where Leda was blinded by devotion, Ansbach's eyes, once literally clouded by enchantment, are open to harsh truths. Where Leda died for an unexamined faith, Ansbach died after ensuring the truth was laid bare for those who would come after. His legacy is a caution. Even the noblest seeming order needs scrutiny, and even the foulest seeming knight might carry wisdom. This layered portrayal of Ansbach's journey from pureblood knight to Miquella's reluctant sage adds depth to the overarching conflict between old and new orders. He leaves us pondering the instability of any ideology, Golden Order or otherwise, when even its staunchest adherents start asking questions. In the cracks of Ansbach's story, we glimpse that the Golden Order's perfection was a facade all along, one that individuals like him and Goldmask would strive to repair or replace. After all, Ansbach's final line, once defeated in battle against Radahn, asks the Tarnished to become a god of men, serving the people instead of the greater wills. The missing naval civilization of the Lands Between. Despite the vast ocean that surrounds the Lands Between and many inlets, rivers, and shores carved into its geography, one finds a curious absence of ships and sailors in the current age. The apparent lack of a naval civilization, no bustling ports, no merchant galleons or naval armadas, is indeed a mystery. Yet evidence of a seafaring past does actually exist. They're just scattered in the form of shipwrecks and lore snippets. See, the key to this puzzle lies in what happened during the long decline of the Golden Order, especially the chaotic Shattering War. First, let's consider the numerous shipwrecks visible along the coasts. Off the southern shore of Limgrave and behind Redmane Castle in Caelid, broken masts and hulls jut from the waters, silent testimony to the ships lost long ago. One likely cause is the Shattering War. As the demigods battled, the conflict was not confined to land. Fleets must have been raised and destroyed. A Radahn loyalist text even notes that those wrecked vessels off Caelid's coast could be leftover warships or merchant vessels caught in the crossfire of the Shattering. In the Weeping Peninsula, we encounter the restless spirits of what might be drowned mariners, shambling undead on the beach who wander toward the sea, as if still seeking a lost ship. These details paint a picture of maritime activity that met a tragic end. It seems the great naval routes and ports of the Lands Between fell into ruin amid the strife, and any organized seafaring society collapsed or was long forgotten. Crucially, we have the rusted anchor, a great weapon that is literally the iron fluke of a ship's anchor wielded in combat. Its description provides a concrete bit of history. When the Tarnished left the Lands Between with their lord, one boat alone was said to have been left behind. This refers to the epic long before the Shattering, when Queen Marika banished Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, and his loyal Tarnished warriors. Godfrey and his men were exiled over the sea beyond the fog, back to the outside world. The rusted anchor here implies that an entire fleet of ships carried the departing Tarnished on this long march, all except one, which remained stranded in the Lands Between. The last boat's fate is unknown, but its anchor ended up in a mine held by a misbegotten. From this, we glean that the Lands Between once had functioning harbors and ships capable of carrying armies. The Tarnished Exiles' fleet might have launched from a great port, perhaps at Limgrave's coast or Liurnia's bays. However, it's a port now lost to time. So, what happened to that maritime infrastructure? It likely eroded during the Erdtree's isolationist era. After Godfrey's banishment, Marika closed off the Lands Between. The fog at the boundaries prevented easy passage. With no new people coming in, until our Tarnished returned, and whatever other stragglers, the Lands Between being self-sufficient as well during the Erdtree's bounty, seafaring could have dwindled. So why sail abroad when the Age of Plenty made everything abundant at home? The ocean may have come to be seen as a boundary rather than a highway. Over centuries, docks rotted, knowledge of shipbuilding waned, and the Navy, if one existed, atrophied. And then, of course, came the Shattering. The demigods and their factions vied for power, and anything still floating was likely pressed into war service or destroyed. If Langdell or Rea Lucaria had any prideful navy, those ships could have been scuttled or burned by rivals. And indeed, after the Shattering, the Lands Between were fractured and war-torn, with no single power to maintain trade routes or naval safety. The seas around the kingdom might have become perilous, with the guidance of grace lost. Sailors perhaps could no longer find safe passage through the fog without Grace's light. A telling detail, once the Elden Ring was broken, even the stars went awry. So, If the heavens and earth were in disarray, the tides and winds could have become ill-omened for sailors. Interestingly, the only mariners we encounter are the ghostly tibia mariners, who ferry the dead in small skiffs. These skeletal boatmen haunt wetlands and shallows, playing their horn and summoning drowned corpses. They appear to be an undead memory of a time when boatmen truly ferried souls or bodies along rivers. Their very presence and the eerie sound of ocean wind that accompanies their phantom boats suggests that in death, the concept of a seafaring guide lives on, even though in life, no such guides remain. It's as if the seas have become the dominion of spirits. In fact, there is lore implying the spirit world is an endless sea and the tibia mariners traverse it. This poetic notion underscores the living have mostly abandoned the oceans. Only now, the dead sail, eternally ferrying lost souls. Furthermore, the monstrous remnants in coastal areas hint that humans no longer control those waters. For example, the coastal caves are home to demi-humans and other beasts. If once there were fishing villages or pirate dens, they've likely long since been overrun. Without a navy or merchants to keep them at bay, creatures like giant land octopi and giant crabs proliferate along the shorelines. In essence, there was a naval culture, implied by the anchor and the need to transport armies, but it collapsed due to the banishment of the Tarnished in the subsequent wars. No single faction in the current era is known for seamanship, though we as the Tarnished, when making our character, can choose the origin or base template of a seafarer, quoted as being the face of one who wanders the seas in search of their home in the lands between, perhaps one that was lost at sea during the long march. As such, the missing naval civilization isn't so much a separate lost culture as it is a forgotten facet of the Golden Order's own civilization. The Erdtree society once had ships and sailors, but through isolation and war, that knowledge and infrastructure died off. The occasional sunken ships and the lone anchor in the misbegotten's hands are all that remain of the time when mighty vessels crossed the fog-bounded seas. Now, the waters belong only to ghosts and the damned, a thematic reflection of the lands between. Should a new Elden Lord arise and unify the realm, perhaps ships will once again set sail. But until then, the naval tradition of the lands between lies dormant, buried beneath the waves along with the bones of drowned mariners. The true purpose of evergaols. Scattered across the landscape, often atop windy hills or tucked in remote corners, lie the mysterious evergaols. Great circular stone platforms inscribed with sigils and sealed by arcane locks. When a Tarnished interacts with an evergaol, they're pulled into a pocket dimension to face whatever entity has been imprisoned there. These magical prisons raise many questions. Who created them, and why not simply kill the entities inside? Well, the answer becomes clearer as you piece together lore on their inmates. The evergaols are an instrument of justice or containment devised by the Golden Order and its agents, a way to immobilize threats that cannot be easily destroyed. Effectively, an eternal jail cell outside of normal time. Consider the enemies you encounter in evergaols. Without exception, they're figures deemed dangerous or traitorous by reigning powers. Bloodhound Knight Darrowil, described as a traitor to his liege. Onyx Lord and Alabaster Lord, ancient beings wielding gravity magic likely sealed away after the war against the stars. Ancient hero of Zamor, a legendary champion of a bygone age preserved in icy slumber. Adan, thief of fire, a rogue thief who stole the forbidden flame of the fell god incantation. These are individuals who, for one reason or another, could not be executed or were worth more alive than dead, so they were bound in evergaols. The Malefactor's evergaol in Liurnia explicitly holds Adan, who once stole the flame of the fell god, an incantation kept secret. This here tells us quite a bit. Adan committed heresy by stealing a closely guarded fire spell, revealing the fell god's power was still lurking in that flame. Rather than kill him outright, which might risk spreading the knowledge or martyring him, the powers that be imprisoned him in an evergaol to remove him from the world indefinitely. The term malefactor even indicates its purpose, a jail for an evil doer. In Adan's case, his evergaol is watched over by fire monks, ones who presumably were involved in catching him. The goal was to erase Radahn as a threat while preserving the secret he stole, locking both him and the forbidden knowledge away in a timeless cell. Likewise, Darrowell's evergaol serves to contain a blood-crazed warrior who betrayed his master. Darrowell is one of the Bloodhound Knights, known for their uncontrollable bloodlust. If he turned traitor, executing him might be difficult. After all, he's clearly highly skilled and evasive, or it could have been some kind of politically sensitive topic, who's to say. But instead, his liege could have trapped him in the evergaol, thus condemning him to an endless solitary confinement. When Blythe remarks that Darrowell was no true knight, it implies Darrowell's disgrace was punished by his unending imprisonment. The Stormhill Evergaol holds a crucible knight, specifically one once loyal to Godfrey. So why would a loyal knight of Godfrey be imprisoned? It could suggest after Godfrey was banished, some of his men refused to accept the new order under Queen Marika or Radagon. Perhaps this Crucible Knight continued to practice ancient Crucible incantations, and thus he became a renegade when the era of the Erdtree began. So instead of killing such a legendary knight, they sealed him within an evergaol to neutralize him. The Crucible Knights, after all, were almost mythical defenders of the primordial Erdtree, so executing one might have been seen as sacrilege or dangerous. So Stormhill Evergaol became his eternal cell. But from all these cases, we deduce the true purpose. Evergaols are used to imprison those whom the Golden Order, or local authorities, deemed too dangerous, indestructible, or useful to simply eliminate. Each evergaol is essentially a magical circle that creates a self-contained demiplane of slow time or stasis. Notice how foes inside an evergaol often speak no words, locked in solitude and aggression. Time likely moves differently in there. The word evergaol itself is literally everjail, an everlasting prison. Some in the community even theorize gravity magic is involved, with the Onyx and Alabaster Lords possibly supporting this. As such, a high-density gravitational field could slow time and trap the subject. And, indeed, sorcerers of Rea Lucaria and Caria who learned to manipulate gravity may have helped construct these jails. The sorcerer Thops mentions that the conspectus of sorcery had different focuses. Perhaps one partial focus could have been sealing magic. An evergaol could be a joint intervention of Golden Order clerics and Lucarian sorcerers to answer a specific need during crises. However, an interesting notion is that sometimes evergaols require a stone sword key to open. These, in particular, tie them to the old magic of sealing used in contraptions across the land between. It's the same kind of magic that seals away treasure in imp-locked catacombs. So the builders of evergaols likely employed the impish sealing stone techniques, but on a grand scale. This could imply that it was an established part of Langdell or Academy Majory. Further evidence, evergaols are an intentional construct of civilization, not some naturally occurring phenomenon. The inconsistency in who is imprisoned, ranging from human knights to otherworldly beings, highlights that the criteria was threat level or taboo status. Some creatures, like ancient hero of Zamor, might have been around since before Marika's time and simply couldn't be killed by conventional means. Sealing such a being kept it out of the way, so to speak. Similarly, the Godskin apostles and nobles appear near some evergaols. The Godskins historically hunted gods and perhaps tried to break into evergaols to finish off what was inside. The presence of such Godskins could suggest that the Golden Order built evergaols as it also values to protect their enemies from falling into even worse hands. Rather than let someone like a Crucible Knight get corrupted or a secret like Fell God's Flame get spread, they sealed them where even Godskin cultists would have struggled to reach. If this theory holds water, that is. So, in essence, the true purpose of evergaols is containment of the unforgivable. They're a humane, or inhumane, alternative to execution when execution is impossible or undesirable. By casting someone into an evergaol, the Order ensured the subject disappeared from the world without outright destroying them. It's lifetime imprisonment taken to its magical extreme. No escape, no aging, possibly an eternal torpor, until someone from outside releases them. This in of itself maintained the Greater Will's status quo, threatening knowledge, heretical powers, and traitors could be swept under the rug of reality. The inconsistent nature of Evergaol's contents, therefore, isn't a sign of randomness. It's a sign of success. The Golden Order managed to corral a wide array of problems into these cells. Each Evergaol we open, as tarnished, unveils a little dirty secret of the past. That long before we arrived, justice, or tyranny, was meted out through magical intervention. By unsealing them, we're effectively opening the archive of enemies the Old Order locked away. And, inevitably, we fight them, either granting them the death they were denied, or at least putting them down again. But, as such, the Evergaols were built by the sorcerers and enforcers of Queen Marika's regime as eternal prisons to neutralize great threats or contain profane knowledge. They behave as arcane holding cells, likely using gravity or seal sorcery to suspend their captives in time. The inconsistency of their inmates only underscores a consistent purpose to forever remove anything or anyone deemed too dangerous to roam free. Through Evergaols, the Golden Order maintained control over the uncontrollable, at least until a certain curious tarnished came along to unlock all those long-sealed doors. The Blind Swordsman and the Sealed God of Rot. Amid Elden Ring's mythic past, one obscure legend speaks of a blind swordsman, a master warrior who achieved the impossible. He defeated and sealed away an outer god. Though never encountered directly in-game, this unseen hero's story is woven through cryptic item descriptions and ghostly lore. The clearest reference lies in the Blue Dancer charm, a talisman depicting a dancer in blue attire. According to its lore, the dancer in blue represents a fairy who in legend bestowed a flowing sword upon a blind swordsman. Blade in hand, the swordsman sealed away an outer god, a god that was Rot itself. This astonishing line reveals that the outer god of Scarlet Rot, the divine force behind Malenia's Rot, was once defeated and imprisoned by this very swordsman. Supporting details come from the Lake of Rot. The map description for that diseased lake states, "The divine essence of an outer god is sealed away in this land." Indeed, the Lake of Rot is widely believed to be the prison of the Scarlet Rot's outer god, where its power lies beneath stagnant red waters, or maybe pink. To be honest, it always looked like Pepto-Bismol to me. Regardless, it was the blind swordsman who achieved this sealing, armed with the enchanted flowing sword given by a mysterious blue fairy. Fragments of his tale are scattered. The flowing curved sword found in a coffin in the consecrated snowfield alludes to a master of the sword garbed in blue, whose blade strikes like a dance of flowing water. Additionally, the prosthesis wearer heirloom even recounts how a young Malenia encountered her mentor and his flowing blade, and gained wings of unparalleled strength, strongly hinting this mentor was the blind swordsman himself. Also, if we look at the curved sword talisman, it notes that a blind swordsman was the originator of the art of allowing one's opponent to strike to leave them vulnerable to reply. And of course, this fits the image of a master who could fight without sight. So if Malenia learned under him, it explains her acrobatic waterfowl dance, possibly derived from the flowing sword style he pioneered. But despite these footprints, the swordsman's name and fate remain unknown, as well as who or what this blue fairy could have been. All we know is that he wore a distinctive blue attire, the blue cloth set, symbolizing flowing water, which in turn connects to nomadic warriors and their ever-drifting ethos. Some also speculate he could have been a Newman or some other race, but nothing is confirmed. We do know that he succeeded in sealing the Scarlet Rot god. Evidence also lies in the scorpion's stinger, a dagger made from a great scorpion's tail, glistening with scarlet rot. It's also described as a ceremonial tool crafted from the relic of a sealed outer god. The implication here is pretty clear. After the outer god of Rot was sealed, remnants of its power, like a giant scorpion, perhaps one of its aspects or champions, were left behind. And so, any heretical followers fashioned weapons from those remains. This aligns with the fact that Scarlet Rot, while contained, still seeps out in places like Caelid, where Malenia diseased the land herself, and the Rot Swamp under Lane Dell. But the blind swordsman's triumph was monumental, yet ultimately temporary. The wrought goddess Malenia would later unwittingly unleash that power in a battle against Radahn, indicating the outer god's essence still lurks. In this regard, with the blind swordsman teaching Malenia, I wonder if it was maybe to keep her wrought powers in check, possibly, with her inheriting the wrought, and with him knowing this and having defeated the god of wrought previously, maybe he was trying to make it so Malenia would act in a way of good? I don't know, that's kind of my own theory in a way of why he taught her specifically. But despite all this, the swordsman's feats stand as a half-remembered triumph, a mere human, albeit aided by some kind of magic fairy, I still don't know. Let me know if you guys have any ideas in the comments. But he defied an outer god and momentarily halted an apocalypse of rot. What happened to him after he taught Malenia? Is his spirit one of those honoring Malenia's fight? Well, in the annals of the Golden Order, he's not even mentioned. Perhaps a deliberate omission, given that his deeds involved fairy magic and an outer god, knowledge that the Order would suppress. Godwyn's death became a spreading condition. The assassination of Godwyn the Golden during the Night of the Black Knives was the first death of a demigod, a pivotal event. But this theory argues that Godwyn's death was not a singular event with a confined outcome. It was the onset of a spreading contagion, a curse of undeath that proliferated through roots and corpses, effectively changing the nature of death in the lands between. Godwyn became the Prince of Death, and his half-death condition started infecting the world itself. First, let's clarify Godwyn's fate. Ranni's hired assassins slew Godwyn in a special way. They used knives imbued with the stolen rune of death to kill his soul, but not his body. Simultaneously, Ranni arranged for her own body to die while her soul lived on. This created a tragic symmetry. Godwyn is a soulless, living corpse, and Ranni became a bodiless soul. Godwyn's corpse was interred deep below Lendel, at the roots of the Erdtree in the deep root depths. Because his soul was gone, but his body yet lived, in a sense, not literally of course, his death didn't behave normally. He couldn't return to the Erdtree, as there was no soul to reclaim, nor did he fully die. Instead, his corpse began to transform and spread. The lore explicitly states that through Godwyn, the rune of death seeped into the great tree roots and spread throughout the lands between. Soon after, the Death Prince's distorted visage manifested itself across the realm. His eyes peered out of the tendrils and vines, and even his distorted face materialized in places of Erdtree burial. This corruption sprouted Deathroot, giving rise to those who live in death. In other words, Godwyn's death turned into a metastasizing blight. The very roots of the great tree network carried death like a fungus, sprouting skeletal plants wherever it reached. If you've explored Stormveil Castle, you might recall that hidden, horrible face deep below the castle. A gigantic, viscerally human face melded into the roots. That face closely resembles Godwyn's own corpse in the deep root depths. These are what the lore calls cadaver surrogates of Godwyn. Essentially, growths or echoes of Godwyn's body spreading elsewhere. The Prince of Death image, with a grotesque visage, appears multiple times, most prominently under Stormveil, but the eyes show up in certain catacombs and out in the open world. All of these suggest Godwyn's death is not a one-off corpse, it's an ongoing condition affecting the lands between. The Deathroot growing is literally pieces of Deathroot infested great tree roots from underground, wriggling up wherever the infection spreads. And what grows around Deathroot? Skeletal warriors, those who live in death, and strange half-dead monstrosities. It's as if Godwyn's incomplete death means a disease of undeath, contaminating the concept of dying. Moreover, Godwyn's former followers responded in quite a curious way. His loyal knights didn't simply bury him and move on. Many of them became amped up undead guards. They became mausoleum knights or death cultists. The existence of wandering mausoleums and the faction like Fia's companions all revolve around this spreading death phenomenon. The wandering mausoleums house soulless demigod remains. As I mentioned in a previous video, we thought these were the corpses of Marika's bastard childs, as she apparently liked to get around quite often. But surrounding these mausoleums are mausoleum knights who literally cut off their own heads to serve forever in undeath. All of this could imply that Godwyn's life and death is distributed and not localized. His essence echoes in multiple dead things. It's almost like his soul diffused into the roots rather than passing on. Again, not that he's alive in any way. He is quite dead. But now at this point, any grave or catacomb might sprout a bit of Godwyn's deathly power. I mean, the Prince of Death isn't just, the Prince of Death like Nito is the Grave Lord. Godwyn is literally a prince in death. So again, Godwyn is dead. But what died was his soul specifically, and what continued on was his body, suffused with death power that shouldn't be lingering. It's an aberration, and aberrations in Elden Ring tend to spread. Think of the Scarlet Rot or Frenzied Flame, which also spread like diseases or fires. Godwyn's death is depicted almost like the outbreak of a rot, except it's the rot of death. It's not content to stay in one tomb. It creeps under kingdoms, cracks through catacomb walls, and causes the very concept of mortality to malfunction. The rise of those who live in death is directly attributed to Godwyn. They're the unholy spawn of the Prince of Death. Every time you fight a Tibia Mariner summoning skeletons, that boss drops Deathroot, literally feeding you the evidence of Godwyn's spreading condition. So, in conclusion, Godwyn's fate was not a single tragic death. It was the introduction of a new state of being in the lands between, undeath. His corpse became the seed of death blight, growing into an expansive root system that now underpins and undermines the Golden Order's cycle of life. The theory that his death is a contagion is strongly supported by how the game world changes after the Night of the Black Knives. Death itself was broken, and Godwyn's half-life is at the root of that break. The Prince of Death isn't resting in peace. He's gnawing at the world from beneath, one root tendril at a time. The hidden land of shadow, where death is suppressed. Far from sunlight and Erdtree grace lies the realm of shadow, an eerie otherworld described in hushed tones as the very center of the lands between, where all manners of death wash up, only to be suppressed. This land of shadow is introduced in ancient inscriptions as a place where the souls of the deceased and forsaken gather, a sort of spiritual sump at the world's core. A monumental suppressing pillar stands there, its inscription confirming the realm's grim purpose. It pacifies and contains death itself. This notion is quite chilling. Whereas the Erdtree absorbs the souls of the departed in the lands between, this shadowed land acts as a catchment for deaths that don't find mercy under the Erdtree. In other words, it's a dumping ground for unwelcome dead, cursed beings, and lost spirits that the Golden Order refused to reincorporate. Imagine this, an underworld, not in the literal sense of a different plane, but a region obscured by the Erdtree's radiance, a blind spot of the Golden Order, so to speak. The Golden Order suppressed this place's very existence, likely because it represented concepts, anathema to order, death without return, and life outside Erdtree law. Indeed, item lore and map descriptions in the DLC reveal that this land was hidden in the shadow of the Erdtree. They said it, implying it was physically present but cloaked from observation. Only when certain conditions are met can one traverse to this realm. So just what do we find in the Land of Shadow? The environment is dotted with spirit graves, ghostly flames, and remnants of an ancient dynastic civilization. Blue ghost flame lanterns flicker in the dark, immediately calling to mind the Deathbirds and the Helfin from the base game's lore. In Elden Ring's main game, we learned of an alternate death philosophy, the ghost flame of the Helfin tree tended by Deathbirds, which guides fallen warriors' souls outside of the Erdtree's cycle. The Land of Shadow appears to be intimately connected to this concept. The fact that ghost flame magic is encountered here, for example with ghost flame breath sorcery, indicates that this could possibly be the realm where the Helfin stands. In essence, the Realm of Shadow is the home of those who live in Death's alternative system, the final destination of souls claimed by Deathbirds and not given to the Erdtree. It's as if all the stray spirits that the Golden Order failed to recycle accumulated in one dark basin, kept in check by ancient sorceries. Another striking element in this realm is evidence of Marika's early life and the Greater Will's interventions. Deep in the Land of Shadow lies an archaic village said to have been home to Marika's people, the Newmen, even referred to as Marika's shamanic village in some speculative texts. This suggests that Marika herself, an outsider, had a cultural origin steeped in shadowed practices or beliefs that predate her ascent. The DLC does hint that Marika became a god in this land, possibly implying she obtained the Elden Ring or made her covenant with the Greater Will here. There's also even a gargantuan petrified tree in the region called the Shadow Tree, a withered thing that might have once been a great tree of a past age, now eclipsed by the Erdtree itself. So, did Marika perform the shattering of the primordial crucible or the sealing of destined death in this land? The evidence is fragmentary, but it fuels tantalizing theories. For instance, one monument in the Shadow Realm speaks cryptically of a divine gateway found at a tower enshrouded by shadow, and a prophecy that a lord will usher in a god's return. It's unclear if this refers to a past event, Marika's rise, or a future one, with a new god emerging in this land. But it reinforces that the Land of Shadow is tied to the cycle of gods and lords in Elden Ring's cosmology. The biggest unsolved mystery of this Land of Shadow, however, is its true nature. Is it a physical hidden region beneath the lands between? Or is it a metaphysical plane, perhaps a dream or spirit world created by powerful will? Or is it just like right over there, look over there? Yeah, it's right over there. But the DLC story and fan analyses suggests that the player's journey to the Land of Shadow might actually be a voyage into Miquella's subconscious, or some kind of a dream projection. After all, when we touch Miquella's withered arm, it seems we enter a reality reflecting Miquella's inner mind, his shadow, so to speak. Yet, the people and places within it, such as the demigod Mesmer or the Suppressing Pillar, were real in history. This paradox parallels other From Software DLCs like The Hunter's Nightmare in Bloodborne, where a mental or dream realm contains authentic memories and truths of past. The theory goes that Miquella, in a state of near death, recreated the Land of Shadow from legend within his own psyche, blending historical fact with symbolic interpretation. The Tarnished experiences this composite reality, learning true lore, even though the journey is through a dream. If this is true, it would explain why the Land of Shadows is both a genuine location with consistent lore and artifacts, and something we can access unconventionally. It also underscores Miquella's crucial connection. He is literally the bridge to this forsaken realm, so perhaps Marika, Miquella's mother, locked away the Land of Shadow within Miquella. One theory posits that only through Miquella's death or awakening could the realm be reached. This, of course, remains speculative, but we do know Miquella sought access to this land to achieve his own goals, implying the realm holds secrets to godhood or resurrection. Ultimately, the Land of Shadow stands as an enormous unanswered question in Elden Ring's lore, a whole facet of the world dealing with death and darkness that the Golden Order swept under the rug. But we've now pulled that rug back just a little. We've seen the ghost flame lit paths of the dead, but much remains unclear. Is there an actual Helfentry flickering there in the dark, guiding souls? Just who built the suppressing pillar and engineered the pacification of death? The Greater Will, or some other power? And what of the ancient dynasty whose architecture is found there? Were they humans who lived outside Erdtree law, or a clan of death-aligned sorcerers? The Land of Shadows offers answers to some long-standing mysteries, but in doing so, it raises even more questions about the metaphysics of life and death in the lands between. It's a ghostly reminder that not even the Golden Order could illuminate every corner of existence. In those dim recesses, shadows grow long, and within them, enigmas endure untouched by the Erdtree's grace. Saint Trina's forgotten identity, Miquella's dreamborn persona. Woven throughout Elden Ring's lore is the tale of Saint Trina, an enigmatic figure revered as the Saint of Sleep. Trina is a mythic character, sometimes spoken of in story and item flavor text, but never encountered directly in the base game. The ambiguity of Trina's identity is legendary. Some say she is a comely young girl, others are sure he is a boy. The only certainty is that their appearance was as sudden as their disappearance. This line from the sword of Saint Trina's description encapsulates the mystery. Trina's gender and origin were deliberately obscured. Such androgyny and elusiveness immediately hint that Trina is not a separate person at all, but an alias or form of someone else. For lore scholars, the prime suspect, of course, was always Miquella, the eternally youthful son of Marika, and over time, this theory gained considerable evidence. Miquella and Saint Trina share striking thematic links. Miquella is forever a child, cursed to never grow older, and Trina, too, is described in childlike terms. Miquella is deeply associated with sleep and dreams. After all, he crafted the Hewg tree as a haven and then went into a long slumber within his cocoon, effectively existing in a dream state. Trina, of course, is linked to sleep. All of Trina's items cause or enhance sleep. For instance, Saint Trina's lilies are pallid flowers that induce drowsiness, used to concoct soporific potions. Trina's sword itself emits a violet mist that lulls foes into sleep. These items turning up across the lands between imply that someone under the name of Trina traveled widely, spreading these blessings. Who better fits than Miquella, known for wandering secretly and helping the downtrodden? The Shadow of the Erdtree expansion has effectively confirmed what was long suspected. Saint Trina was Miquella's alter ego, a secret persona through which he interacted with the world in disguise. Lore bluntly states Saint Trina was once destined to be Miquella's fate. She was his other half, a separate self within him, and thus a triplet and a secret Empyrean child of Marika and Radagon. Like their parents, they were two minds and two souls sharing one body. This bombshell essentially reveals that Miquella had a sort of dual being. As Miquella, he appeared as a golden-haired boy, and as Trina, he could manifest as a violet-haired young woman. It likens, of course, to Marika and Radagon's duality. In reverse, however, two souls in one body instead of one soul in two bodies. This lore is very complex and possibly rooted in dream or spirit mechanics, but it aligns perfectly with the earlier hints. It means that Trina, being a boy or girl, wasn't just hearsay. It was literally because Miquella was presenting as Trina at times. It also explains Trina's sudden appearance and disappearance. As Miquella's shadow self, Trina would cease to exist whenever Miquella was occupied, or when he withdrew. But why would Miquella adopt the Saint Trina persona? The in-universe rationale likely boils down to freedom and covert influence. As a known Empyrean, Miquella had eyes on him from friend and foe alike. He was cherished by many, but also targeted. By contrast, Saint Trina was an anonymous saint, not overtly part of the Golden Order's political tapestry. Disguised as Trina, Miquella could walk among ordinary folk, offering help without drawing the hostility that a demigod might. We know Miquella cared for the common people and those suffering, and it fits that he might roam incognito to ease pain where he found it. In fact, The cult of Saint Trina mentioned in the lore, with devoted followers like Dolores the Sleeping Arrow and Tialie, suggests Trina personally touched lives and inspired faith. These followers use sleep arts to induce deep slumber, hoping to encounter Trina again in dreams. The blooming of pale purple lilies and the creation of sleeping potions by Trina's priests show a gentle, non-lethal form of worship. It's almost a pacifist cult compared to other factions, very fitting for the kind Miquella. Another compelling piece of evidence was always linguistic. The name Trina might be a play on Trinity or a hint at threes. Miquella and Melania are twins, too. But if Miquella had a second soul, that being Trina, then as the DLC says, he was a triplet. The use of Trina, similar to trinary, means threefold, and this was likely deliberate. Also, Miquella's Erdtree symbol is a triquetra, a three-looped knot. This, of course, is more triad imagery. Before the DLC confirmation, fans also pointed out that Saint Trina is nearly an anagram of Artina, which has no clear meaning, but the emphasis was always on the tri prefix. Perhaps the most beautiful hint was the item Saint Trina's torch. This torch scales with faith and intelligence, and its description subtly notes it was beloved by an Eastern confessor who used it to hunt down those who talked in their sleep. This suggests the Golden Order's agents feared Saint Trina's influence, possibly capturing believers who spoke of her dreams. It hints at a minor persecution of Trina's cult by fundamentalists, implying Trina's following was real enough to threaten orthodoxy. And who in the Order would merit that reaction? A new saint gaining popularity outside the Two Fingers' approval, which would be the case if a disguised Miquella was gathering a quiet following. But now, in light of the DLC's events, we can assert Saint Trina was Miquella all along. The dream entity of Trina was essentially Miquella's spirit, operating independently in the world of dreams and subtle magic. Lore states that she was his other half, two minds and two souls in one body. This might imply that Miquella could project an aspect of himself, perhaps when he dreamed or meditated, a bit like how Ranni left her body via a doll, or even the small doll that we also encounter. The notion that Trina was destined to be Miquella's fate suggests maybe at one point Miquella considered transforming fully into Saint Trina or living through that identity, but events like the Shattering and Miquella's abduction interrupted that fate. In practical terms, Saint Trina's identity being forgotten in lore means that no one at present, except maybe the player or the very wise, realizes Trina was Miquella. It was a well-kept secret, lost to time after Trina vanished. The sword of Saint Trina ended up in a chest in the Forsaken Ruins, and Trina's lilies grow unattended in quiet corners, vestiges of a story half remembered. Only now, with hidden knowledge, can we link the threads. So, what dreams might Miquella, as Trina, have spun? There's speculation that the soporific flowers and widespread sleep phenomena, like the slumber of the ancestor spirits or the repose of the deathbirds by Ghostflame, could tie into Miquella's dream power. One tantalizing line, some inhabitants were so enamored they formed a cult. Like purple lilies numbed the senses, and priests used sleep-inducing arrows, implies that Trina's gentle creed gave solace, maybe to those horrified by the Shattering. Imagine war-weary folk praying for Trina to visit their sleep and give them some kind of peace. Miquella could have influenced events by pacifying key figures through dreams. There's even some theory that Miquella put the demigod Godwyn to sleep before the Night of Black Knives, but that's very conjectural in of itself. Regardless, Trina represents Miquella's kindness operating undercover. Where Melina was a visible guide, Trina was a soft presence, perhaps appearing in dreams as a comforting youth with a calming smile. It speaks to Miquella's character that he might have wanted to experience life as a saint among the people, not as a lord above them, and, in doing so, he straddled the line between reality and dream. In the current timeline, Saint Trina is effectively gone. Their sudden disappearance noted in lore. This correlates with Miquella withdrawing into his cocoon and then being taken by Hewg. Without Miquella's consciousness actively wandering, Trina ceased to manifest. So it's no wonder that when we, as players, only arrive after those events. Trina is but a mystery from the past. Only through piecing item descriptions and DLC lore do we reconstruct this dual identity. Who were the ancient astrologers before Raya Lucaria? Long before the glintstone sorcerers of Raya Lucaria raised their academy, there were the astrologers, stargazers whose wisdom laid the very foundation of Liurnia's magical heritage. These ancient astrologers were human sorcerer scholars from a bygone age, revered for their knowledge of the stars and the primeval current of magic. In effect, they were the precursors to the Carian royal family and the academy. References to them are sprinkled throughout lore. The Carian princesses are called heirs of the ancient astrologers, and runes in the mountaintops of the giants indicate that astrologers had settlements alongside the fire giants long ago. For a moment, imagine the era. This is likely pre-Erdtree or early Erdtree age, when the stars and the cosmos reigned supreme in magical practice. Back then, sorcery was not about golden order or faith. It was about observing the cosmos to harness its power. The astrologer's starting class, one of the origins we can choose, is a direct nod to this legacy. It implies a scholarly people who studied glintstone sorcery at the academy in modern times. But the name astrologer itself harkens to those who looked to the night sky for guidance. In the founding reign of stars sorcery, described as the eldest primeval sorcery, said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer, we have a key link here. This legendary spell, which calls a rain of starry lights, was found in the mountaintops and is attributed to an astrologer of old. This suggests the ancient astrologers dwelt in the high places, the mountaintops, for clear stargazing, and there they unlocked primeval currents of magic from the stars. The stargazers' runes in the mountaintops further flesh out their identity, a runed settlement in the western mountaintops of the giants, seemingly once inhabited by ancient astrologers. Here, significantly, we find the spirit of a possibly young astrologer girl, the jellyfish, Aureliette, waiting for her sister, the jellyfish spirit ashes that Roderica gave us. This tells a haunting human element, showing that real communities of astrologers lived up on the mountains, families and all. The mountaintops were sacred to them, likely because it's closer to the cosmos and far from the Erdtree's latter center of power. This positions the astrologers as contemporaries of the fire giants. In fact, it's plausible the astrologers predate Marika's Golden Order entirely. They could have been active during the time of the Crucible, when life was mixed and primordial, or during the early Erdtree time, but separate from the budding Golden Order. One might ask then, did the ancient astrologers have any political structure? The answer is hinted through Rennala and the Carian lineage. Lore strongly hints that Queen Rennala of Caria was herself one of the last true astrologers before the practice evolved. One source states, Rennala was one of the ancient astrologers, and her prowess was so great that she founded a royal family, the Carians. If Rennala is an ancient astrologer, that means she carried on their star-driven sorceries, particularly the full moon magic, which is a branch of primeval current. The Carian royal family, tracing back to the astrologers, also explains why their crest is the star and moon, and why Liurnia's throne was in the hands of sorceress astrologers. So basically, the ancient astrologers eventually became the Carian royals. Perhaps Rennala's mother or ancestor was an astrologer from the mountaintops who migrated to Liurnia. They established a house in Liurnia, where the star magic met the glintstones found in the region. Raya Lucaria was built with the combined knowledge of these astrologers and the power of the glintstones. And indeed, the Academy of Raya Lucaria was co-founded, or at least heavily influenced by these astrologers. The scholars of the Academy revere Lusat and Azur, two ancient sorcerers who sought the primeval current. They themselves are continuing what the astrologers started. However, in the Academy, and eventually, the primeval current was considered heresy by mainstream scholars, which is ironic, considering it's basically the original magic of the astrologers. But at this point, it's now considered too dangerous or extreme. This suggests the original astrologers' teachings were eventually restricted as the Academy formalized. But why? Possibly because the Golden Order's influence grew, and they wanted sorcery to be more control-oriented and less cosmic. So, the ancient astrologers became almost mythical forebears by the current era. The astrologers also appear to have ties with other groups, possibly found within the Eternal Cities. The people of Nokron and Nokstella had their own fascination with the stars. After all, they wanted their own night sky. It's conceivable the astrologers had contact or rivalry with the Noks of the Eternal Cities, since both dealt with stars, one on the surface, one underground, making fake stars. The Greater Will actually punished the Eternal Cities with a meteor. The ancient astrologers may have harvested such fallen stars, the glintstone crystals, to amplify their magic. Glintstone sorcery is explicitly the amber of the cosmos, a gift from the stars. This tells us the astrologers not only watched stars, but also worked with the material the stars provided. Hence why, by Rennala's time, carrying a glintstone staff channeling star shards is pretty standard. In sum, the ancient astrologers were the stargazing sorcerers of old who laid the groundwork for Liurnian sorcery and Carian royalty. They lived in places like the mountaintops in Liurnia, charting the heavens and developing primeval sorceries like the founding reign of stars. Additionally, we can find stone astrolabes dotted around the lands between on high-up cliff faces. Whether these are the astrologers or the academies leads to some speculation, but regardless, the astrologers likely taught their craft to their descendants, who became the Carian dynasty, or dynasty, fucking Moog, explaining why Caria is said to trace back to them. Over time, their tradition was institutionalized into Rea Lucaria Academy, founded by the combined efforts of the astrologers and the glintstone miners. The ancient astrologers, thus, were not a different species or anything, but an earlier generation of sorcerers, whose devotion to the night sky and its currents of magic persisted even as Golden Order faith spread elsewhere. They coexisted with, or slightly predated, the Erdtree's rise, choosing stars over tree. That's why even the Troll Knights of Caria have an oath to the moon. It's a holdover of that astrologer culture, as the trolls were called by the Carian heirs of astrologers to fight for Rennala, swearing by the moon and the stars rather than the Erdtree. Finally, it's poetic to note why they're called astrologers, not astronomers or sorcerers. Astrology implies reading fate in the stars. These ancient scholars likely believed the stars dictated destiny. They probably served as seers, using the night sky to prophesize. We know that when Radahn was defeated and the stars fell, the fate once writ in night sky resumed. This belief system is pure astrologer doctrine. It means the astrologers' teachings about cosmic fate were correct. Their traditions carried on in Carian astrology and were validated when the stars moved again. The ancient astrologers were the progenitors of Rea Lucaria's sorcery and Carian astrology, an order of star-focused magi existing alongside early Erdtree society. They built observatories, studied primeval sorcery from the stars, and guided their people by the movements of the heavens. Over time, they evolved into the Carian lineage, with Rennala, last queen of the full Mu, as a direct inheritor of their starry wisdom. Their influence persists in every glintstone staff and every sorcery that calls down stars, though the Golden Order later branded some of their knowledge as heretical primeval current. The legacy of the astrologers still shines in Liurnia's night sky, and in the fate of the stars that even gods cannot completely defy. The Storm Lord of Stormveil, sovereign of the vanished winds. Stormveil Castle's tempest-torn ramparts hide the memory of a lost sovereign, the mysterious Storm Lord whom Godfrey, the first Elden Lord, defeated in single combat, when Godfrey was still Horalu, chieftain of the Badlands. He conquered Stormveil by facing the Storm Lord alone and emerging as the new lord of the castle. This much is known from the ancient hero tales and Godfrey's own armor inscriptions, yet the identity and nature of the Storm Lord remain maddeningly unclear. No explicit description of this entity or being appears in-game, only the aftermath. A giant lingering storm and colossal claw marks scarring Stormveil's walls. These claw marks, at least, providing some environmental clues that eagle eye players have noticed. Though whether these are actually from the ensuing battle, or from when I believe Radahn tried to fight Gurranq at his own castle, is up to some speculation. I don't know, the fact that they're pockmarked and they're covered in thorns as well, it's quite confusing. But regardless, was the Stormlord a literal great storm dragon, a primordial hawk king, or perhaps a personification of the Tempest itself? One clue in particular lies in a relic tied to Stormveil, that being the ashes of the Stormhawk King. These ashes describe a hawk revered by all others as sovereign, back in the days when Stormveil's winds still raged like no other. This implies that in Stormveil's distant past, when its winds howled violently, a great hawk ruled the roost, a king of storms that lesser hawks revered as their sovereign. Could this be the Stormlord in another form? The language suggests an ancient monarch of the winds, proud and unwilling to serve any summoner. So it's tempting to think that the Stormlord was this giant stormhawk, a literal great bird commanding the tempests. After all, Stormveil's current guardian beast is a lineage of warhawks. Perhaps they're descendants or even remnants of that original king. Who's to say? Still, it's speculated the Stormlord could have been a great dragon of wind whose defeat by Godfrey cemented the Golden Lineage's rule over Limgrave. Godfrey's epithet, Lord of the Battlefield, includes the line that he fought the Stormlord alone, suggesting his foe was singular and mighty. If that foe was a dragon, it would mirror how later Tarnished faced dragons to assert dominance. There's also the possibility the Stormlord was more abstract, perhaps the embodiment of Stormveil's weather, in a world where stars are living beings and outer gods reside in concepts. Maybe the Stormlord was a minor god of storms. Additionally, the banished knights of Stormveil, who still harness storm winds in their attacks, could have once worshipped this lord. Their armor and techniques pay homage to storm winds, implying a long tradition of storm worship at the castle. If so, Godfrey's victory might not have just been over a beast, but over the very spirit of the storm that shielded Limgrave in pre-Erdtree times. So, the final question remains, then, of what became of the Stormlord's power after their defeat? We see small vestiges. Stormveil's winds are now calmed and no longer raging like no other, and its avian monarch is reduced to a spirit ash that heeds no summons. Godfrey's triumph meant that Stormveil's storms were tamed, or at least quieted, under Golden Order rule. But intriguingly, when Nefeli Lu, Godfrey's descendant, takes up the mantle of ruler, you deliver the Stormhawk King's ashes to her. This symbolizes the return of the Storm's sovereign to the lineage of Horalu. So, the winds themselves might stir again under Alu's leadership, hinting that the Stormlord's legacy was dormant rather than completely extinguished. It suggests that the spirit of the storm awaited a rightful heir to acknowledge it, and with Nefeli, the ancient pact between Storm and Lord might just be renewed. In the end, the Stormlord remains another enigma. Precisely because we never see it directly, we only can piece it together from a line of text, a set of ashes, and environmental storytelling. Was it hawk or dragon, god or gale? From Software deliberately leaves this puzzle unsolved. What else is new? The sovereign of Stormveil's past is a ghost in the wind, its exact form lost to time. All we know is that it took the greatest warrior of an era to bring it down, and in doing so, Godfrey claimed not just the castle, but the very climate as his vassal. The unanswered question of the Stormlord's identity continues to swirl, a whisper on the winds of Limgrave that teases a grand, untold story just beyond our grasp. The Erdtree is a regulatory system, not the origin of life. The Erdtree looms large over the lands between, literally and symbolically. It's natural to assume the great golden tree is the source of all life and power. However, lore hints that the Erdtree as we know it was not the beginning of life. but a later imposition, a system to regulate and refine life from a more primordial state known as the Crucible. In short, life existed in a chaotic, blended form before the Erdtree, and the Erdtree's Golden Order imposed structure and restrictions on it. Evidence for this comes from the Crucible, which is referred to as the primordial form of the Erdtree, where all life was once blended together. The Crucible is mentioned in item descriptions of Crucible Knight armor and incantations. It paints a picture of an ancient era when life was a singular soup, all species, all forms intertwined. Creatures like the Misbegotten and Omen, with mixed traits with wings and horns and scales, are said to be closer to the primordial Crucible, and notably, the Golden Order stigmatizes them for it. In fact, it's stated that over time, the Crucible's living vestiges came to be seen as chaotic and deserving of scorn. The Erdtree era regards those blended forms as impure. That's clue 1. Life used to be unified and wild, and the current order suppresses those features. Clue 2 is that the moment the Golden Order is established, destined death, the rune of death, is removed and sealed. According to finger reader Enya,
the rune of death goes by 2 names. The other is destined death, the forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation.
Queen Marika began her reign by literally plucking death out of the world's natural cycle. Before, all life died true deaths. After, death became artificial. Spirits returned to the Erdtree via Erdtree burial instead of perishing naturally. This act created the condition of immortality for the demigods and introduced a new concept, order as cycle. From that point on, beings would ideally sprout from the Erdtree, live, and then return to its roots in death, only to be reborn if they aligned with the Golden Order's grace. It's not life from nothing, it's life under new management. Further supporting this, the Golden Order explicitly replaced the notion of destined death with Erdtree burial as the proper fate of beings. Think about for a second what this means. Originally, life forms would simply die, and that was that. Destiny's fulfilled. The Golden Order said, no, you die in our prescribed way, buried at the base of the Erdtree, so your spirit returns to collective cycle. The Erdtree became a great recycling machine for souls, so to speak, a way to perpetuate the Erdtree's power and keep the golden lineage immortal. It's less a natural tree of life and more like a regulatory system or infrastructure, ensuring everything follows a certain path, one that's advantageous to Marika and the Greater Will. The Erdtree's grace even chooses who gets resurrected, in such cases that being the Tarnished, as they were exiled and then their grace rekindled when needed. This is a management of life and death on a grand scale. The Crucible versus Erdtree contrast also explains the persecution of impure creatures. After the Erdtree's establishment, anyone or anything bearing traits of the old mixed life, the Crucible, is shunned. Actually, the whole Crucible and Erdtree discussion really reminds me of how the undead and those bearing the Hollow sign were shunned in Dark Souls. You know, we see in the beginning of Dark Souls 1, they came from the dark, and that is humanity's natural form. And just like with the Crucible, that's like the original natural form. It's that wild and untamed state of being. I don't know, even with cycles, you definitely see a lot of comparisons to, Dark Souls. But speaking more on the Crucible Knights themselves, once elites of Godfrey's age, eventually had their appearance deemed chaotic and were disdained. The Omens with horns, vestiges of the Crucible, are cursed to live in sewers. Why? Because the Erdtree's order is exclusive. It prunes the branches of life that don't fit its design. It's a tightly controlled ecosystem where only certain approved life forms and paths to death are allowed. Thus, the Erdtree isn't the ultimate font of life, but rather a grand device that took the raw material of life, the Crucible, and organized it. One could say that it domesticated life. The Erdtree's glowing golden grace and avatar guardians enforce the law of what life should be, at least according to them. As a result, those ancient currents of life, like crucible power or death itself, had to be sealed, removed, or marginalized for the Golden Order to claim perfection. Life did not start with the Erdtree. Life was standardized by the Erdtree. The Erdtree is holy, yeah, but it's also an instrument of authority, regulating life's cycle in a way that served a specific vision of order. This theory casts the Erdtree not as the mystical giver of life, but as the grand manager of it, keeping the cycle clean, controlled, and above all, orderly, even if that meant excising fundamental truths like death and mixing to achieve it. The Golden Order runs on delayed divine communication. Have you ever felt like the gods in Elden Ring are on silent mode? Well, that's because, according to this theory, the Greater Will's guidance is extremely delayed and indirect, resulting in a flawed Golden Order that is basically running on autopilot and old instructions. The two fingers, those giant twitching fingers that serve as envoys, receive infrequent updates from the Greater Will, and, in the long gaps, the Order is effectively guessing and interpreting what to do. The Golden Order is basically a game of telephone played across eons, with doctrine ossifying while the actual god is distant. The game gives a very explicit piece of evidence for this. After burning the Erdtree, if you speak to finger reader Enya, she explains that the two fingers are communing with the Greater Will for new guidance, and it may take thousands, if not tens of thousands of moons before they respond. I mean, we're talking centuries, possibly millennia, for a divine message to get through. That means that every major revelation or change in the Order could be ages out of date by the time it's received. Yeah, God's will is not faster than the speed of light, unfortunately. The current Golden Order is essentially built on the last set of instructions the Greater Will gave, which dates back to when exactly? Possibly when Marika was enshrined as God, when the Order was formed and the Elden Ring was intact. Since Marika's betrayal and the Shattering, the Greater Will hasn't issued any new commandments that anyone knows of. The two fingers are literally sitting there idle, waiting on hold for the next epical phone call. In the meantime, what happens? Interpretation, tradition, and guesswork. The finger readers, like Enya, interpret the twitching of the two fingers. The two fingers themselves are just relays. They only talk when the Greater Will sends something. And again, Enya interprets these twitches. I mean, come on, how the hell do you interpret twitches? That doesn't make any sense. Whenever Enya spoke to us, or was speaking for the two fingers, whenever she says, listen, the way I always interpreted that was, it was just like kind of what you wanted to hear and what she wanted to hear, what the Golden Order wanted to hear, and not even necessarily what the two fingers were saying. I mean, I'll say it again. How do you interpret twitching? Anyway, besides just Enya, you have figures like Brother Corrin and Goldmask, analyzing the fundamentals of the Order, trying to solve its riddles. In the absence of these direct messages, Goldmask ultimately discovers that the Golden Order has imperfections and unstable ideology due to the fickleness of the gods. This line from the Perfect Order ending reflects that the Order's doctrine has drifted or become inconsistent, likely because people have been winging it with partial information for so long. The gods, Marika and Radagon themselves, introduce contradictions, fickle actions, and without a clear word from the Greater Will, the followers are left rationalizing and patching the holes with dogma. Consider also how the Greater Will operates. It sent the Elden Beast as a vassal, and it communicates via visions of grace in the two fingers. It's not a hands-on deity in daily affairs. And now it's incredibly far away, literally across the stars. So the Golden Order functions much like an institution whose founder or CEO has gone radio silent, leaving subordinates to follow the last memo to the letter. I mean, for all we know, the Greater Will could even be dictating other places, beyond just where the lands between and, the Earth that takes place in. I mean, there could be like Golden Order Martians or something, who knows? But with all this, the will, the guiding order, is quite stale. Enya basically admits the Greater Will hasn't responded to the shattering crisis in any timely fashion. Instead, humans like Marika took drastic steps, that being removing death and shattering the Elden Ring. And now humans like the Tarnished are trying to mend or reinvent things, while the Fingers flail or lie dormant. This explains why there's disorder in the supposed order, different interpretations from the Golden Order fundamentalists, Two-Finger followers, and even recusants. They all conflict in some way or another. The Greater Will's silence creates a vacuum. It's exactly under those conditions, when a religion has to fill centuries of silence with its own politics, that doctrine can become unstable or corrupt. I've also kind of realized myself over the years that since Miyazaki takes such inspiration from Kentaro Miura, the mangaka behind Berserk, that religion is usually looked down upon, from Demon Souls to Dark Souls to Elden Ring. I mean, really think about it. Even especially Bloodborne. I mean, if there is a religion in a FromSoft game, they usually are fanatics and are like completely in the wrong for the most part. Let me know if anybody else has noticed this pattern, because in Berserk it's, sort of the same thing. But besides direct real-world comparisons, we also see evidence of this instability in-game. Goldmask deduces a flaw in the Golden Order's mathematics, indicating it's not perfect. The Golden Order Principia spells out principles like the law of causality and regression, but even those principles are being re-examined by scholars. It's as if the world is running on scripture that hasn't been updated, and now some are realizing it doesn't account for new realities. Like, why would the Greater Will allow Marika to shatter the Elden Ring? Does that mean the Order had a flaw, or was it part of a larger design? No one knows, and the Greater Will isn't saying. An objection might be, well, if it's delayed, the Greater Will does eventually communicate, so it's still guiding things. But from a practical standpoint, that's as good as absent. If a divine answer comes 1,000 years after the crisis, everyone involved is dead or the world has moved on. In the meantime, who's in charge? Not the Greater Will, it's the interpreters and the remnants of its institutions. The Order is basically running on fumes, ancient edicts and human interpretations, rather than a living, present will. This casts the Greater Will almost as an absentee landlord. It sets up a system and then left or went to sleep. I got this water damage in my ceiling and the landlord is nowhere to be seen. What are you going to do? Well, you got to call somebody yourself and, figure out what to do with it. So it's really no wonder the world fell into chaos when Marika shattered the Elden Ring. The system itself had no quick response from above. Instead, it's taken until the ending of the game when you mend or replace the Order for any resolution, essentially bypassing the Greater Will entirely if you choose certain endings. So, in summary, the Golden Order's divine hotline is on a huge delay. The resultant order is like an aging machine running on outdated software, stable looking on the surface, but full of bugs and exploits. It claims to be absolute, but internally it knows something's wrong. The longer the Greater Will stays quiet, the more the Order drifts, hardens, and even decays. The instability of ideology within the Golden Order can indeed be blamed on the capricious remote gods. They aren't actively steering the ship, thus leaving mortals to quarrel over the wheel. This theory underscores that what the player encounters is a moribund religion awaiting an overdue prophecy or patch. I mean, come on, FromSoft, where are the patch notes? But this may never actually come unless one takes the initiative to rewrite the Order anew. Minor Erdtrees. why do they behave differently? All across the lands between, one sees the graceful silhouettes of minor Erdtrees, golden saplings grown large but still dwarfed by the gargantuan Erdtree at the realm's center. These minor Erdtrees are not random flora, they are in fact intentional offshoots of the great Erdtree, planted or nurtured to extend its blessings far and wide. Unlike the Erdtree proper, which is essentially a cosmic pillar housing the Elden Ring's power, the minor Erdtrees seem to function as regional conduits of the Erdtree's life-giving energies, and thus they behave a bit differently, each with their own quirks and life cycle. But firstly, we must ask ourselves, who or what planted or even built the minor Erdtrees? The wording here is quite tricky since, trees grow, but there's strong evidence that the Greater Will's followers deliberately propagated these trees. After the Erdtree was established and began its age of plenty, its golden sap ran freely. It was considered the most precious substance. We have the description that the blessed golden sap of the Erdtree fell like tears from its boughs and were used to spread the faith. This line implies that in the early age of the Erdtree, the sap, or perhaps seedlings of the Erdtree, were taken and planted throughout the lands to spread Golden Order faith and abundance. In other words, the minor Erdtrees were very much a project of the Golden Order, akin to missionaries planting holy trees in every region. Each minor Erdtree would sanctify the area around it, its golden dew nurturing the land, and its presence standing as a symbol of the Erdtree's reach. In this, we see practical results. Near almost every minor Erdtree, one finds crystal tears, the crystallized sap that forms over ages and carries miraculous properties for the flask of wondrous physic. The minor Erdtrees are literally manufacturers of divine sap, slowly secreting the tears of the Erdtree that harden into potent crystals. These tears, when mixed into physic, reproduce miracles like boosting strength or faith. The existence of these tears shows that minor Erdtrees were cultivated to be local fonts of the Erdtree's grace and healing. They behave differently from the main Erdtree in that they actively produce these harvestable boons that individuals can use. Essentially, a distributed network of life-giving sap for the populace. Moreover, minor Erdtrees often have catacombs or burial watchdogs nearby, indicating they're also sites of Erdtree burial on a smaller scale. In the lands between, the dead who are blessed are returned to the roots of the Erdtree for burial. Their bodies nourish the tree and their souls presumably go into its energy. Minor Erdtrees have roots that spread under the earth, and indeed in catacomb dungeons labeled Erdtree catacombs, you see thick roots penetrating chambers and Erdtree burial watchdogs guarding the interned. This means that, in a way, the minor Erdtrees served as satellite burial sites, consuming the dead of their region and sprouting new life from them. Now, another question, why do the minor Erdtrees behave differently from each other or even from the main Erdtree? Well, the main Erdtree is impervious, towering, and was essentially unchanging until we, the Tarnished, set it on fire. Minor Erdtrees, by contrast, can wither or be destroyed, and they each have peculiar guardians. For one, many of the minor Erdtrees we encounter are guarded by Erdtree avatars. These are lesser beings that act almost like immune responses of the tree. The Erdtree avatar will attack anyone who comes close, as if defending the sap shrine. These avatars suggest that the minor Erdtree has a sort of guardian spirit emanating from it, a fragment of the Erdtree's own power, but at a smaller scale. The presence of these guardians is a major behavioral difference. The main Erdtree doesn't manifest an avatar to swat you away, but the minor ones do, implying they have a more contained defense mechanism. This could be by design. The Golden Order may have imbued each planted minor Erdtree with a protective sentinel born of a sacramental wood to ensure no profaner steals the tears or defiles the site. Over time, some avatars seem to have gone rogue. In some cases, we find ulcerated tree spirits bursting out from near minor Erdtree roots. This shows that these mini guardians can malfunction or mutate, this being another difference from the singular Erdtree. The minor Erdtrees also differ in vitality depending on the state of their region. For example, the minor Erdtree in Caelid is scarlet and charred, seemingly dead, unsurprisingly, as Caelid is ravaged by Malenia's scarlet rot. So the fact that the Caelid minor Erdtree could be killed by rot, whereas the Erdtree proper resisted the rot, indicates the minor ones are far less powerful and more vulnerable. They're like offshoots that don't share the full invincibility of the parent. Meanwhile, in the consecrated snowfield, the minor Erdtree still stands but has no avatar. Instead, its guardian is a putrid avatar variant, one that's rot-afflicted, suggesting that even that far north, the minor Erdtree felt the effects of rot or another blight. In the mountaintops of the giants, curiously, there is no healthy minor Erdtree. This could suggest that in the mountaintops, if minor Erdtrees were planted, they did not thrive in the freezing, fire-scoured environment. The ancient astrologers up there likely did not embrace the minor Erdtree if it was ever planted, or the Golden Order never managed to plant one before the war consumed a region. Thus, minor Erdtrees behave differently in each region based on local conditions. In healthy lands like Limgrave or Liurnia, they glow and give tears, but in war-torn or blighted lands like Caelid or the mountaintops, they're dying or are just completely absent. As such, they really are extensions of the Erdtree's grace. And if grace wanes in an area, then the minor Erdtree there wanes too, and thus possibly even its guardian. Another perspective here is that Miquella's Hewg tree is essentially an artificial minor Erdtree, or an alternative great tree. If Miquella deliberately grew the Hewg tree to be a new embodiment of abundance, separate from the Erdtree, then as such, the Hewg tree could behave differently, or it does. It droops and it doesn't radiate golden light, and it's ultimately in a failing state, likely stunted by Miquella's adduction. This truly shows the difficulty of replicating the Erdtree's function. Minor Erdtrees were a standardized, presumably greater will-approved way to propagate Erdtree life, but something like the Hewg tree, not sanctioned by the greater will, struggles. Thus, minor Erdtrees behave uniformly in providing golden sap and Erdtree blessings because they are official offspring, whereas unsanctioned ones behave aberrantly. So, in conclusion, the minor Erdtrees were planted by the early Golden Order to distribute the Erdtree's blessings across the lands. They served to propagate faith, places where the Erdtree's sap would drip like tears in hardened crystal amber to be collected for miracles, and where the dead could be returned to the Erdroot for an honored burial. Each minor Erdtree grew a guardian and developed according to its environment, which is why they're not all identical in state or behavior. They lack the sheer immortal power of the great Erdtree, making them susceptible to regional calamities like rot or war. Their behavior, from spawning aggressive avatars to yielding unique crystal tears, is a function of their design as miniature Erdtrees, meant to actively interact with people. The great Erdtree stands aloof, ever shining with grace, but the minor Erdtrees were built to be hands-on givers of grace, literally dropping droplets of glory for the faithful. And in times of strife, they became rallying points or targets, hence their differing fates. In essence, the minor Erdtrees are the Golden Order's planted seeds of holiness, each growing in its own way. Lesser echoes of the one true Erdtree, with the singular purpose to extend the Erdtree's life-giving order to every corner of the realm. The eternal cities tried to replace the gods. Deep beneath the lands between lie the eternal cities of Nokron and Nokstella, whose downfall is written in the stars, quite literally. This theory posits that the Nox people of the eternal cities weren't just dabbling in forbidden sorceries. They were actively attempting to usurp the gods and the greater will, building their own parallel order to replace the Golden Order. The runes and lore of these cities suggest a civilization preparing to defy the cosmos. Our biggest piece of evidence towards this is the Fingerslayer blade. That would be our smoking blade, instead of a smoking gun. But this key item, which you find in Nokron and deliver to Ranni, is described as the blood-drenched fetish blade that was proof of the Eternal City's high treason. It's no ordinary weapon. It was created specifically to kill the gods' emissaries. able to slay the Two Fingers themselves, which triggered the Greater Will's wrath in the form of the beast Estelle that destroyed their cities. High treason, indeed. The Nox mirror helm further reveals the Nox's intent. It was worn by Nox conspirators and wards off the intervention of the Greater Will and its vassal fingers. To put it plainly, the people of Nokron and Noxtella were gearing up for war against the Greater Will's influence, cloaking themselves from its sight. But the plot here goes even deeper, actually. Recall the Mimic Tier project. The Nox attempted to forge a lord by creating a being that could imitate a lord's form. And what about the environment of the Eternal Cities? They crafted artificial life like the Silver Tiers, and above their cities they formed an artificial night sky, complete with false stars. Everything in those cities whispers of imitation and replacement. A false sky to mimic the true stars, gooey silver creatures that can assume forms, and even an attempt to make a lord of their own. In essence, the Nox civilization was building a shadow Erdtree of sorts, their own self-contained cosmos under the earth. They had a weapon to slay the gods, a method to create a new lord, and a society hidden from divine gaze, awaiting a new lord of night to lead them. All signs point to a full rebellion, not just in practice, but in principle. The Night Maiden's lore states the Nox were banished deep underground. Now they live under a false night sky in eternal anticipation of their liege, of the coming age of the stars, and their lord of night. This wasn't just a minor heretical cult, it was a parallel power structure, a rival religion trying to summon its own age. The Eternal Cities essentially said, if the Greater Will won't grant us a lord and an age, we'll just craft our own. One might object that the Nox were simply researchers of sorcery and life, that their experiments with mimicry and living dolls accidentally veered into blasphemy. But the coordination of evidence suggests intent. They weren't just messing around and happened to offend the Greater Will, they were aiming to overthrow it. Again, the Finger Slayer blade was purpose-built to kill the gods' agents. The Mimic Tier was purpose-built to create a new lord. The entire aesthetic of their cities, a starry firmament underground, evokes a replacement heaven. When you line up these pieces, the picture emerges of a grand conspiracy. The Eternal Cities tried to usurp the Greater Will and fabricate their own divine order. But this all ended in ruin, and the ambition behind their treason is unmistakable. They weren't just playing with powers they didn't understand. They fully intended to dethrone the order of the Golden Order and set up their own Age of Stars, long before Ronnie made it a reality. Marika's forsaken son, Mesmer and the curse of the Abyssal Serpent. Of all the demigods fated to obscurity, none is as startling as Prince Mesmer, an eldest son of Queen Marika, whose existence was all but unknown until the Shadow of the Erdtree's expansion's revelations. Mesmer the Impaler, as he came to be called, was born long before the Shattering, prior to the Second Liurnian War, records say, making him older than Radahn, Rykard, or even Morgoth. His addition to Marika's family tree complicates everything we thought we knew about the divine lineage. How could an elder demigod be absent from all the tapestry of history? The answer itself is quite harrowing. Mesmer was cursed from birth, and Marika, ever the calculating goddess, concealed and ultimately discarded him to preserve her perfect golden order. Mesmer's curse was a dark and ravenous entity coiled within him, described as an evil serpent that threatened to consume his being. This wasn't a literal snake one could extract. Rather, it was a malignant spirit or outer god inhabiting his soul, termed the Abyssal Serpent. From the moment of his birth, Mesmer's eyes likely burned with unnaturally serpentine fire. Marika acted quickly. Using her divine power, she sealed the serpent inside Mesmer with a powerful, grace-given restraint. One can only imagine the holy sigil or binding that Marika placed on the infant, perhaps similar to how she later sealed destined death into Malekith's blade. This seal kept Mesmer's inner beast dormant, but it also defined his tragic life. He grew up under heavy watch, always in fear that the base serpent within would surface. Winged serpent creatures became his constant companions. Oddly, it's noted that winged serpents flocked to him as friends, helping suppress the evil within. It's as if nature itself pitied Mesmer, sending lesser serpents to comfort and contain him, or perhaps to urge him to let the abyssal serpent run loose. Much like his younger half-sister Malenia harbored the scarlet rot, Mesmer harbored a fiery curse. The parallel is quite striking. Malenia and Mesmer each carried a contamination from an outer god. Both struggled to control it. Where Malenia developed a warrior's discipline to delay blooming, Mesmer despised the flame inside himself and desperately sought to rid himself of it. Yet, as with Malenia, any cure eluded him. The dark fire ever burned in his soul despite his attempts to quench it. This paints Mesmer as a deeply sympathetic figure, a demigod who never asked for the power inside him and who was effectively punished for it from birth. Marika's solution to her firstborn's plight was as cold as it was pragmatic. Rather than publicly acknowledge a cursed heir, she eventually sent Mesmer away on an impossible crusade. The Golden Order records likely boulderized in official histories that Mesmer was charged by his mother with carrying out a purge of the tower-dwelling Hornsent of the Land of Shadow, those whom did not bear the light of grace. In plain terms, Marika tasked Mesmer with exterminating a population of Hornsent, beings with horns, a term evoking the Crucible's children, like the Omen or Misbegotten, who lived in the Land of Shadow and lacked the Erdtree's grace. These Hornsent were likely the remnants of the old Crucible era, or the communities that rejected the Golden Order. This was essentially a holy genocide, and who better to do it than the son Marika wanted to disappear? It was a cruel gambit. If Mesmer succeeded, the Order would be rid of both the Hornsent and him. If he failed or died, well, problem solved either way. Mesmer, loyal and hopeful for approval, undertook this shadow crusade with zeal. He proved a formidable general. He even befriended an Albanar commander, Gaius, who led his armies and was like an older brother to General Radahn in youth, indicating Mesmer's campaign involved various peoples of the fringes. But the Grand Purge was destined to be thankless. Partway through the campaign, Marika cut off all contact and abandoned Mesmer in the Land of Shadow. In essence, she exiled him as a scapegoat, disavowing him and leaving him to an indefinite fate. One imagines Mesmer waiting for word from the capital that never came, then realizing he'd been forsaken. Yet, ironically, he continued executing the purge even after being cast off, perhaps out of spiteful devotion to his mother's last command, or simply having nothing else left. For years, maybe even centuries, Mesmer lingered in the Shadowlands, becoming a dark legend. Those who stumbled into that realm would come to fear the Impaler. Alone and grieving, Mesmer likely brooded on Marika's betrayal, and by the time the Tarnished arrives, we find a bitter, battle-hardened figure still clinging to duty. Mesmer confronts the player as a boss, initially maintaining his human form, but as the fight turns against him, desperation wins out. In a climactic moment, Mesmer rips off Marika's binding, that being by ripping out his own eye, unleashing the full force of the abyssal serpent inside. He transforms into a massive serpentine fiend hybrid, wreathed in black flame, a horrifying sight that confirms our worst suspicions about his curse. In that instant, Mesmer becomes akin to another famous serpent-infused figure, one is reminded of Praetor Rykard, who willingly merged with the Great Serpent. Honestly, if he had known, he probably would have been jealous. But unlike Rykard, Mesmer's fusion is not by choice. It's the belated blossoming of the monster that had always dwelt within him. Even unleashing the beast isn't enough. The Tarnished defeats Mesmer, putting down the rampaging serpent for good, and in his final moments, Mesmer realizes that his mother had truly forsaken him, the final heartbreaking thought of a son who only wanted acknowledgement. With Mesmer's death, we obtain Mesmer's kindling, an artifact that allowed the burning of a great thorn barrier, the sealing tree, elsewhere. It seems even in death, Mesmer's accursed flames served as fuel for someone else's ambition. Having reached its conclusion, the saga of Mesmer is rife with lingering mysteries. Foremost, what exactly was the abyssal serpent that possessed him? The game presents it as a unique evil, possibly an outer god of serpentine chaos. Is it related to the god-devouring serpent of Mount Gelmir? That serpent was immortal and reborn, but it was a local deity. Mesmer's serpent feels more abstract, dubbed base or abyssal, suggesting a fundamental embodiment of sin or savagery. Perhaps it was an aspect of the great serpent worshipped in antiquity. The key point, however, is that we don't know how Marika's infant became host to such a thing. Was Mesmer's birth cursed by an outer god due to some cosmic omen? Most all of Marika's other children are cursed in some way or another, so that is a possibility. Lastly, Mesmer's existence forces us to re-examine Marika. She was willing to sacrifice her own child for the greater will's vision of order. If she hid Mesmer, what else did she hide or erase? It casts Marika's character, already mysterious for her later shattering of the Elden Ring, and her deviousness as a god, in an even more ambivalent light. Did guilt over forsaking Mesmer factor into Marika's long-term plans? We don't know, but it adds a layer of tragedy to Marika's lineage. Miquella and Malenia were cherished, but doomed, while Mesmer was damned from the start and expunged from memory. With Mesmer's tale now unearthed, we have a new unsolved thread to tug at: the true extent of Marika's family management, and how many secrets of her reign remain buried in shadow. Mesmer's story, once completely lost to time, now stands as one of Elden Ring's most poignant, unsolved mysteries. A demigod who lived and died in darkness, defined by a question: was he the monster or the victim of one? Rennala's rebirth is a failed escape from the Erdtree. At Raya Lucaria Academy, we encounter a bizarre and poignant scene. Queen Rennala clutches a golden amber egg, surrounded by the crawling, pale sweetings, young beings she's reborn through a ritual of rebirth. The theory here is that Rennala's act of rebirth, powered by the amber egg and the great rune of the unborn, represents an attempt at an alternative cycle of life outside of the Erdtree's authority. In other words, Rennala's rebirth is a parallel system to the Erdtree's rebirth, one grounded in glintstone sorcery and lunar magic. It fails in the sense that beings reborn are imperfect and quite short-lived, suggesting Rennala's escape from the Erdtree was only partially successful. Key evidence of this lies in the item description of the Great Rune of the Unborn, which is the object inside Rennala's amber egg. It says this rune perfects those who have been born anew. Yet, crucially, it also notes children born anew by Rennala are all frail and short-lived, imperfect beings, each and all. So, the process works. It does bring about new births, but the results are pretty flawed. Those pale students around Rennala, they're her reborn children, and they don't last. The existence of this great rune is remarkable. Unlike other great runes, which belong to demigods and relate to aspects like bounty, blood, and so on, the rune of the unborn is essentially the power of rebirth. The fact that it's active and doesn't need activation at a divine tower implies it was functional from the get-go. Rennala has been using it over and over to birth people anew, including us when we respec or change our appearance. And if we didn't have access to this great rune, then we would essentially be short-lived and die as well. But we'd probably just go back to the last grace. But now consider what this means in context. Radagon, who was Queen Rennala's husband before he returned to become Marika's second half. gifted Rennala this amber egg. Inside was presumably a great rune, the rune of the unborn. So one might ask, why would Radagon, a staunch Golden Order fundamentalist, hand over a powerful rune of rebirth to a sorceress queen? Now considering this, it could have possibly been to console her. Or maybe because Radagon saw the value in a kind of sanctioned rebirth for non-demigods. Regardless, Rennala kept it, and after Radagon left, she became broken and obsessed with the egg. What she ended up doing with it was essentially creating a mini cycle of reincarnation inside the academy, separate from the Erdtree burial. Under the Golden Order, if you die and are favored by grace, your spirit returns to the Erdtree to be reborn. Rennala's followers, however, have their spirits reborn through the amber egg in glintstone. She literally hatches new lives from the egg via glintstone sorcery. This is a heretical mimicry of the Erdtree's life cycle. Instead of relying on Erdtree burial and Erd roots, Rennala uses the primal amber. And let's remember, amber in lore often contains old life, and is from the stars, and in a way it's like an ancient sap. Glintstone sorcery itself draws from stars in the cosmos and not the Erdtree. Rennala, a master of lunar magic, is tapping into those powers to recycle life. The presence of juvenile scholars and the fact that they're short-lived implies something is missing. Perhaps the Great Rune alone isn't enough to fully renew life. Maybe it lacks the Erdtree's blessing or the Greater Will's grace, leading to fragile beings that soon perish. In essence, Rennala's system is independent but incomplete. It's like an off-brand Erdtree cycle. It works to an extent, but it's not perfect. However, the mere fact it exists is really interesting. It shows that rebirth outside the Erdtree is possible. There's a hint of a competing life cycle. Now, however, consider the placement. Lucaria Academy, devoted to glintstone and the moon, houses this egg. This aligns with a broader theme, that the moon and stars represent different metaphysical traditions than the Erdtree. The moon, associated with Rennala and Ranni, is often seen as a rival to the Erdtree's light. Ranni's ending, the Age of Stars, explicitly supersedes the Erdtree's rule with a cold night lit by moonlight. It's no surprise then that Rennala, steeped in moon sorcery, was exploring a way to preserve life or avoid true death through her own lunar method. Some might argue that Rennala is just delusional after losing Radagon and tries to rebirth people, only out of misplaced motherly grief. She did technically lose her daughter Ranni's body, after all, and while it's true Rennala was emotionally shattered, the mechanics of rebirth are concretely real. We, the Tarnished ourselves, undergo rebirth through her. It's not a hallucination. It's a bona fide magical process supported by a great rune. So, even if her motivations were personal, the implications are cosmic. She stumbled upon or was entrusted with a power that contrasts with the Erdtree's way. It's also noteworthy that the Erdtree Seal incantation item notes how Golden Order fundamentalists later accepted some glintstone practices, showing interplay and competition between these schools of thought. Rennala's rebirth rite might have been heretical to the Golden Order, but tolerated as long as it was imperfect and limited to Lucaria. So, Rennala's rebirth can be seen as a failed escape hatch from the Erdtree's monopoly on rebirth. It was real and repeatable. People could be reborn and anew without Erdtrees or Erdroots involved. Even Bock as a demi-human is reborn as, an actual human, but he immediately dies soon after. And all of these beings are completely flawed and they just can't thrive. So the theory's strength here is highlighting that even in failure, Rennala's process proves the Erdtree is not the only way to recycle life. It's just the effective way, since her way results in frail offspring. Given better execution, or perhaps if the Amber Egg had more divine power, you could wonder if a full alternate life cycle could have taken root in Liurnia. In the game's present, though, Rennala's little world of rebirth is a forlorn bubble. It's a vestige of a different path that ultimately didn't overturn the Erdtree system. But it did come tantalizingly close. Close enough that you have to wonder what could have been if the Amber Egg's promise of perfected rebirth had been realized beyond the confines of a single grieving mother's chamber. Why do fire monks guard both the Giant's Flame and heretical fire? On the surface, it seems contradictory. The fire monks of the mountaintops were appointed to guard the Flame of Ruin, the Giant's Flame, a duty given by the Golden Order after the Giant's defeat. Yet, we also find that some among them have embraced other, heretical flames, such as the Black Flame of the Godskin cult. So, how can the same faction be responsible for safeguarding an official holy taboo, and also dabble in forbidden fire magic? The answer lies in the corruption and splintering of the fire monks' faith over time. What began as a sacred charge to monitor and contain a dangerous flame eventually led to these monks to worship the flame itself, even its illicit aspects, thus blurring the line between duty and heresy. But first, let's go back to their origin. After Marika's forces won the war against the Giants, the Flame of Ruin could not be extinguished. So, Marika decreed that it be sealed and watched over. To this end, she appointed the fire monks and fire giants' own surviving caretakers, the Flame Guardians, as wardens of the flame. These fire monks were essentially a new religious order under the Golden Order's umbrella. They were given special vestments and incantations. Their robes and armor were emblazoned with the Fell God's face as a warning, to imprint the idea of taboo through fear. In other words, the fire monks' initial role was to prevent worship of the flame by making it an object of dread. They themselves were supposed to be devout followers of the Erdtree who simply kept the Giant's Flame contained, and for a time, they did exactly that. They remained in the Forbidden Lands leading to the Giant's Forge, fighting off any intruders and ensuring the flame stayed confined. However, after many years of solemn duty, a fire monk succumbed to its allure. The monks were staring into an irresistible fire for generations, the primal power of the Flame of Ruin, essentially a fragment of the Fell God, and it worked on them like a slow poison of the soul. Eventually, the Guardians became believers. The very notes of history confirm this. The fire monks eventually succumbed to the flame's allure and worshipped it out of reverence and fear. What they once guarded as a duty, they began to venerate as a god. And this is why, in-game, fire monks are aggressive zealots. They aren't calmly doing a job, they're fanatics who pray to and channel the Giant's Flame now. Once that mental slide happened, it opened the door to other heresies. The Black Flame of the Godskin Apostles is essentially the flame of destined death, propagating of killing gods, and was historically wielded by the Glow-Eyed Queen and her apostles against the Golden Order. Initially, one would think fire monks and Godskin cultists are opposites. One serves the Golden Order's command and the others try to kill gods. But post-corruption, the fire monks' true loyalty shifted to flame itself above all. They revere fire in all its facets. Hence, some monks broke off to follow the Black Flame. These became the Black Flame monks, a subsect who joined the Godskin cause, or at least learned their flame arts. A note in the Giant's Flame lore also says some fire monks were captivated by the Black Flame, becoming Black Flame monks. This itself is direct evidence that the Order of Fire Monks was split. Most still worship the flame god's ruinous flame, while a faction got seduced by an even more blasphemous flame, perhaps seeing it as another aspect of one of the true divine fire. From the Golden Order's perspective, all of this, of course, is heresy. The irony here is that the fire monks were created to enforce a taboo, and they ended up heretics themselves. They guard the Giant's Flame, yes, but not to keep it hidden anymore, rather to protect and honor it as sacred. When Radahn, one of their own, stole the Fell God's Flame incantation, he was likely stealing it from the fire monk's custody to use it himself. The fact that he's called a thief and imprisoned means that, while the Golden Order condemned him, perhaps the monks secretly admired his devotion to the flame's power. Radahn dresses like a fire prelate, which further ties him to their ranks. Similarly, the fire monk armor set description reveals their inner conflict. They wear the face of the Fell God on their garb not just as a warning, but eventually as devotion. frightening others even as they themselves held faith in the fire within. They started to believe in the very thing they were keeping locked away. So now the question is, why would they guard both? Well, because from their perspective, it's all the same truth in flame. The Giant's Flame is literally a fragment of a fell god, an aspect of fire as destructive chaos. And the Black Flame is the residue of destined death, a dark aspect of flame that slays divine life. To a corrupted fire monk, the difference might be merely semantic. Both are sacred, terrible flames denied by the Golden Order. So this is why you find fire monks proper up in the mountaintops guarding the forge, and you find their corrupted cousins, black flame monks, aiding the godskins in divine towers. Both sects originated from the one order. Essentially, the fire monks' original charge put them on a slippery slope. By focusing on the flames and rejecting Erdtree worship, they became susceptible to flame cultism in multiple forms. There's also an interesting note. In-game, the fire monks will attack you just as fervently whether you approach the Giant's Forge or if you encounter a black flame monk in a hero's grave. They perceive you, the tarnished champion of the Erdtree, as the heretic. In their eyes, the flame is the true path. Whether it's the Giant's Flame they were supposed to watch over, or the black flame of the gloam-eyed queen, or even the frenzied flame if it came to their knowledge. Though, can you imagine? Flame of frenzied monks? Oh my God, that'd be pretty cool. In summary, the fire monks guard the Giant's Flame because it was their ordained mission by Marika, but they ended up guarding it out of zealous worship rather than mere duty. And they guard or wield heretical fire like the Black Flame because over time, their faith twisted into flame worship in all forms. The through line is fire. To the monks, the Erdtree's dogma that flame is a threat turned into the revelation that flame is divine. Thus, the very figures meant to be fire wardens became fire devotees, adopting every flame they could, be it the red flame of ruin or the black flame of the gloam-eyed. It's a cautionary tale built into Elden Ring's lore. Rigidly enforcing a taboo can sometimes create fascination and eventually cause the guardian to fall into the very sin they guard against. As such, the fire monks exemplify this, standing at the forge's precipice, chanting to the flames they were meant to contain, their minds and order sundered by the myriad seductive fates of the fire itself. The colossal skulls of Caelid's wastes. Scattered across the blighted landscape of Caelid are immense skeletal remains, colossal skulls half buried in crimson rot. These hulking crania are far larger than any giant or troll, hinting at a long-extinct species of giant that dwarfed even the fire giants. Their eye sockets are so large that Caelid's monstrous crows can roost inside practically. In the mountaintops of the giants, similar titanic skeletons lie fully exposed, but in Caelid, the bones are tangled in wooden roots and fungi, as if the land itself tried to reclaim them. So, what killed these behemoths? In truth, the cause of the colossal giant's extinction remains unknown. Elden Ring offers no direct answer, leaving us to speculate whether a great war or cosmic cataclysm felled them. Theories, of course, are abound. Some believe they're casualties of an ancient war between dragons and giants, while others whisper that scarlet rot itself consumed the land and gave birth to these giants anew in a cycle of decay and rebirth. Indeed, the most hideous skulls lie north of Celia, in rot-soaked Caelid, fueling the notion that the rot might be birthing new monstrosities even as it decays the old. Yet nothing is confirmed. Even the game's oldest lore keepers seem ignorant of these titans' story. The only tantalizing clue comes from cut content. In unused dialogue, finger reader Enya once called General Radahn the Slayer of Giants, implying Caelid's colossal bones may connect to a forgotten chapter of Radahn's legend. If Radahn truly truly earned that epithet, perhaps he led a campaign against these primeval giants, a conflict that could have been excised from official history altogether. Although any war with giants, of course, would be before his time, so who's to really say? But whatever the truth, these silent skulls loom as eons-old witnesses to an epoch the lands between has entirely forgotten. They remind us how little even the demigods comprehend of what came before. After all, if Caelid's very hills hide the graves of unnamed colossal gods, what else lies buried beyond living memory? So, the mystery of the skulls endures, casting a long shadow over Caelid's already cursed ground. Yet another mystery forgotten to time. Why do spirit ashes retain personality after death? One of the more poignant phenomena in Elden Ring is how spirits you summon from ashes often display memories, emotions, and behaviors from their former living selves. These aren't mindless holograms or automatons, they feel like actual people or creatures they once were, just in spectral form. The reason behind this is rooted in how souls and death work in the lands between. Unlike the crude undead, spirit ashes are the genuine spirits of deceased individuals, bound to ash through a gentle ritual which preserves their will and character. Evidence for this lies in the descriptions of the ashes themselves. Take Leda the Albinauric's ashes. Personally, my favorite summon. I'm part of that Leda gang. Fuck the Albinauric mimicry. But anyway, it notes that she is a rare case of one who chose to become a spirit voluntarily. Leda retained full self-awareness, so much so that she will converse and even guide you while summoned. Her spirit form is immobile, exactly as Leda was in life after losing her wolf companion, Lobo. This tells us Leda's personality and memories migrated entirely into the ash. It's still her. Another example, the Fire Monk ashes describe the spirit of a particular monk who watched over the giant's flame. It recounts his personal story, how after years of dutiful service, he succumbed to its allure. And when you summon him, he'll cast flame incantations and even buff himself against fire, just as the biography suggests. Clearly, the ash is carrying his distinct history and behavioral patterns, not a generic husk. So this retention is possible because in Elden Ring's metaphysics, spirits are the cognitive soul of a being, as opposed to their corporeal form. When someone dies, their soul can persist, especially if bound or guided rather than released. In one case, spirit tuning, as practiced by Radahn, is an art that finds spirits still dwelling in their ashen remains and nurtures them. Those spirits still dwell because their strong will or purpose anchors them in life. Many of these characters had unfinished business or intense dedication that kept their spirit form from dissipating. For instance, banished knight Oleg's ashes contain the spirit of a knight so fierce and loyal that even in death he fights on, protecting his summoner with the same vigor he once protected royalty. Black Knife Tish's ashes summon the vengeful spirit of the Knight of the Black Knives assassin. She moves with the same deadly purpose to strike down foes, reflecting her old mission. The very phrase, "spirits yet dwell," in ash descriptions implies that these are complete souls, not fragments. It helps contrast spirit ashes with other post-death outcomes. Regular undead, those who live in death, often lose their minds, becoming skeletal or bestial. That's because their death is unholy and their souls are in stasis, denied the Erdtree's grace. But spirit ashes seem to be a more benevolent preservation. They're often associated with the Erdtree's rituals. For example, many ashes are found at rebirth monuments, suggesting these monuments help spirits linger peacefully. The Erdtree's blessing can allow the spirit to keep its identity rather than falling into madness. I guess unless you're the ashes of one of the merchants from the caravan underneath Lanedale. Yeah, there's no helping them. They're literally mad. But we even see in animals like the jellyfish spirits. They retain a personality. The spirit jellyfish Ash is called Auriella, a little jellyfish girl who searches for her distant home and cries gentle spectral tears. In life, Auriella was likely a young girl, and in spirit form, she's still herself, innocent, forlorn, and loving. She even recognizes her long-lost sister when you reunite their spirits, demonstrating memory and emotion. So, who built or enabled this system? It's heavily implied that spirit ashes were an intervention of the Erdtree worship and the sorceress arts combined. The art of trapping a spirit in ashen remains seems to have been a consensual or ritual act, at least in some cases. Latenna, for example, willingly gave herself up as ash so that she could guide a tarnished to fulfill her pledge. Other times, warriors of old are found already bound to ashes, possibly a product of ancient spiritualists or the Two Fingers followers who prepared these remains so the heroes could fight again when needed. Here, there's a touch of reverence. Spirit ashes might be seen as a way to honor great warriors or dear companions by letting them continue to assist the living. Crucially, the spirit retains personality because nothing corrupted the soul in the process. The ash serves almost like a vessel or anchor, similar to how the Erdtree holds the souls of the departed in its roots. But here, instead of merging into the Erdtree's collective, the soul stays individual within the ash. Even the spirit tuner, Radahn, comments that she can hear the little voices of the spirits in the ashes. They speak to her of their feelings and wishes, which is how she gently strengthens them. This shows the spirits communicate as sentient beings, even when dormant. And when strengthened, they often gain moves or behaviors that align with their story. In sum, spirit ashes retain personality because they are the true spirits of the dead, preserved by ethereal means rather than hollowed by undeath. The Lands Between's laws of death were broken by Marika. The Rune of Death's removal allowed many souls to linger without passing on, and some linger as aimless undead, but others, through more humane or mystical means, were bound to ashes. Those souls remember who they were, and on being summoned, they behave exactly as that person would. Whether it's a raging banished knight who still hates dragons, or a noble sorcerer who still casts spells in the same style. The Erdtree's grace, glintstone sorcery, or other old magic has effectively snapshotted these individuals at death, preserving their minds and hearts. It's a bittersweet mercy. These spirits are not at rest, but neither are they lost. They fight on, animated by the same convictions or attachments that define them in life. As the Tarnished, you can call them to your side. You're not commanding puppets, but rather enlisting the genuine ghosts of heroes, villains, and friends who continue to exercise free will, within the bounds of aiding their summoner, that is. This is why using spirit ashes can be oddly emotional. For example, Perfumer Trisha's spirit mixing her protective perfumes mid-battle just as they would have done when alive. Their defining traits survive death. Elden Ring's world, steeped in the denial of the natural death cycle, has made it so that personality can transcend the mortal coil, for better or worse. The spirit ashes are a beautiful and haunting demonstration that, in the Lands Between, not even death can dim the strongest wills. They persist in ashen memory, awaiting a new purpose. Why does grace appear to some enemies, but not others? While journeying through the Lands Between, observant Tarnished may notice that certain enemies have a peculiar golden glow in their eyes. These foes yield extra runes when slain, and their luminous gaze looks suspiciously like the golden aura of grace. This is not a mere coincidence. According to lore, grace is literally manifested as a golden light in the eyes of those blessed by the Erdtree. In the age of the Erdtree, every living inhabitant was bathed in the grace of gold. Their eyes shone with a hue of golden light, symbolizing the Erdtree's blessing and the Elden Ring's presence within life. Only those who lost the Erdtree's favor, the Tarnished, had their light dimmed, their eyes turning lifeless until grace was returned. So, when you encounter a common mob, say a Godwyn soldier or a random peasant sorcerer on the road, whose eyes suddenly gleam with that otherworldly gold, it means that individual has recently been touched or retouched by the Erdtree's grace. Grace is seemingly fickle and selective. Not all beings can see its guidance. In fact, most Tarnished nowadays don't even see it. But grace can flicker to life in unexpected places. A lowly foot soldier who remains faithful to the Golden Order, or even a wild creature that happens to fulfill some purpose of the greater will. might in that moment receive the guidance of grace, and their eyes shine to mark the blessing. Those golden-eyed enemies are essentially grace-sighted. Mechanically, as I just mentioned, this is reflected by their higher rune yield. Runes are concentrated fragments of the world's life energy, and in lore, grace itself is the root of life, at least in the lands between. An enemy brimming with grace will, upon defeat, release more runic powers than others. In world, one could say that the Erdtree's vigor is flowing through that creature, making it a richer vessel of life force. The notion is even supported by an old Miyazaki interview. He explained that the golden light in a person's eyes is the blessing of the Erdtree made visible. Thus, an enemy with glowing eyes is literally more alive or spiritually intact under the Erdtree's grace, and so they give more when slain. So why only some enemies and not others? Well, it comes down to who still has the Erdtree's grace and who has been forsaken. Many of the enemies we face are former heroes or commoners who have long since fallen from grace. Take, again, Godrick's soldiers. As retainers of a disgraced demigod, many are essentially tarnished themselves. Their golden light lost generations ago. Not in the literal form, as they still presided within the lands between, but the point stands. Some enemies remain, or once again come, in alignment with the Erdtree's will. For example, a Lanedell knight fervently defending the capital might still carry the grace in his eyes, marking him as one of the Erdtree's blessed guardians. Even beasts and lesser creatures are not excluded. Grace is said to be given to people throughout the land, great and small, by the Erdtree. Great and small could include anything from a commoner to a giant crab, if such beings fall under the Erdtree's aegis. It's also possible that the time of day or specific circumstances awaken grace in random individuals. Some adventurers theorize that enemies with golden eyes appear more often at night, almost as if during the darkness the guiding light of grace shines more starkly for those who have it. Perhaps those creatures are in a sort of devotional trance or have recently communed with the sight of grace. While not confirmed in canon, one can imagine, for instance, a traveling warrior stopping at a minor Erdtree shrine, his eyes alight with newfound grace, only to cross paths with us thereafter. The philosophical irony here is quite rich. The player, a Tarnished, was someone who had lost grace and was banished long ago, now returned. We, the Tarnished, systematically cut down many who still have their grace, as evidenced by those glowing eyes. It underscores a major theme in Elden Ring's story, the changing of eras. Grace chooses new champions, and often abandons the old. Those lingering blessed enemies are relics of the current order, flickers of the Erdtree's favor that ultimately will be snuffed out as a new age dawns. When you slay a golden-eyed foe, you're literally extinguishing a bit of the old grace and absorbing its powers for your own ascension. So, in summary, grace appears in the eyes of some enemies because they still carry the Erdtree's blessing, whereas others do not. The golden-eyed enemies have been touched by the greater will. They're either faithful adherents, fortunate souls, or possibly just random beneficiaries of grace's caprice. That golden glow is the same blessing that guides us, the Tarnished, manifesting in unexpected quarters. And it's a reminder that the Erdtree's grace yet lingers in the lands between, even in enemies you face. But as the Tarnished rises and old orders fall, that light is fading, one glowing pair of eyes at a time. Dominula's blood-soaked festival of madness. On a windswept hill in Altus Plateau, the Dominula Windmill Village appears almost joyful at first glance. Villagers dance around garlanded windmills, giggling and clapping in perpetual celebration. Yet the scene quickly curdles into horror. Corpses and flayed skins adorn the village, and the women dancing are spattered with dried blood. This would appear to be the site of an old festival so grotesque and ancient that even Queen Marika herself paid a blind eye to it. In Dominula's heyday, its maidens gathered to celebrate an archaic ritual of human sacrifice and ecstatic violence. According to preserved lore. This delightful festival is an old tradition, one old enough for the Erdtree to tactically tolerate its endurance. In other words, the festival predates the Golden Order's rule. It's a remnant of a bygone age that the Erdtree quietly allowed to continue. It is, after all, decently close to where the Erdtree and Leyndell lie, but perhaps deeming it insignificant or too isolated to quash overall. So what exactly is happening in Windmill Village? The dancers, known as celebrants, are mostly women with unnaturally elongated fingers, wild eyes, and frenzied grins. They wear tattered festive garb, some in yellow cloaks stitched with Erdtree symbols, others in vibrant blue capes embroidered with swirling designs of the Godskin Apostles. Each, however, wears a crown of many-colored flowers and an amulet of golden orbs, parodying a joyous festival attire even as they commit atrocities. Scattered notes describe that young girls in vibrant blue capes played a central role by separating sacrifices from their skin. Additionally, a ghost in the village cries in terror. "Hey, I hear a festive melody! No, don't skin me! My hide is filthy, I swear!" A victim's final plea as the celebrants literally flay people alive as part of their ritual. Piles of skin and gore are heaped around the windmills, confirming the human sacrifices that fuel the ceremony. The celebrants' choice of weapons further illustrates their derangement. They wield tools made from human bones, like the celebrants' rib rake and sickle, which even grant a few runes per hit, as if the act of bloodletting is rewarded by the land. Some swing huge clubs caped with giant skulls, decorated in flowers, perhaps relics of earlier victims or a homage to long-dead giants. The skulls are slightly larger than any human head, but the festival's true purpose, however, remains frustratingly opaque. There's no single item that says, "Here's why they dance and kill." The presence of the banners and cloth with Godskin Apostle symbols does suggest a link to the Godskin cult, which historically engaged in gruesome rites. After all, they flayed divine beings and crafted their robes from their supple skin. Also, speaking of supple, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but Elden Ring uses the word supple a lot. Let me know if you also noticed that. I just thought that was funny. Anyway, in addition to the Godskin cult, a Godskin Apostle resides at the top of the village, as if he's on a stage like a culmination of the celebration. This itself implies the festival could originally have been a carnival of harvest for the Godskin cult, where maidens would skin sacrifices to mimic the Glomide Queen's power of destined death. Alternatively, it may date back further to pre-Erdtree fertility or harvest rituals that became corrupted into cannibalistic feasts. Marika's blind eye stance hints that the Golden Order allowed certain pagan traditions to continue in remote areas, likely to avoid unrest. Perhaps with the Glomide Queen's defeat, this was the one way that they quelled the masses that celebrated in this way. You know, you can have your festival, but you can't have your god-slaying flame. I don't know. Regardless, over time, Dominula's practice may have degenerated into a senseless bloodshed, a village of women driven mad by some local demonic influence or by inherited custom. The fact that the celebrants laugh and dance blissfully even when you arrive is quite chilling. They seem almost in a trance of joy, utterly disconnected from the horror of their actions. This could also be a way for them to cope, I guess. The land is in pretty dire straits, but some have also speculated that perhaps Shabriri or the Frenzied Flame had touched this village. After all, endless laughter and chaos are hallmarks of madness in Elden Ring. Yet the celebrants' eyes are gold, not the yellow of frenzy, and they lack the telltale flame marks. So this suggests it's not the Frenzied Flame at work, but rather a cultural madness, a tradition of senseless violence passed down through generations. So, in essence, Dominula is an unresolved mystery of human darkness, a window into how ordinary folk might fall into depraved worship outside the purview of gods and demigods. We never really learn the festival's name or origin, only that it's very old and was somehow tolerated. And again, this close to the capital. What deity or principle they were originally celebrating, and what twisted celebration of life and harvest could they have wanted to fulfill? The inclusion of the Godskin Apostle as a boss honestly might be the biggest clue that we have. Perhaps the celebrants were offering skins to this apostle, reenacting the ancient Godskin rituals on a bit of a smaller scale. If so, Dominula's festival could be a folk echo of the Night of Black Knives, commoners attempting to partake in the power of slaying the divine by horrific proxy, although that in of itself is maybe a bit of a reach. So, in the absence of definitive answers, the Windmill Village stands as a testament to From Software's layered storytelling. It's a morbid set piece that invites the player to ponder what calamities or beliefs drive a community to such extremes. Even after clearing the village and slaying the apostle, the mystery persists. Those that remain continue to dance and laugh as if nothing had happened, their smiles never leaving their faces. Dominula itself leaves us with enduring mental images, the cheerful singing turning to screams, the beautiful wildflowers interwoven with human remains, but no comfort of understanding. It's a final reminder that not all riddles in the lands between have solutions given to us. Some lore mysteries like Dominula's festival exist to enrich the world's sense of antiquity and dread. They hint at untold histories, perhaps better lost to time. Who built the Divine Towers, and why are they so inconsistent? The 6 divine towers looming over the lands between are among the most mysterious structures in the realm. Each tower serves as a monumental reliquary for a demigod's great rune, reactivating its power when the Tarnished brings the shard to the summit and communes with the Two Fingers there. Yet, the tower's architecture and state of repair vary wildly from one region to the next. To understand who built them and why they don't all match, we must consider their form and the events surrounding their use. Physically, divine towers share a few common traits. They're cyclopean spires of gray stone, often with circular layouts and steep internal lifts. Strangely, their stonework bears resemblance to ancient ruins and even the Giant's Forge in places. In fact, embedded in the top of each tower's pedestal is a chunk of glowing meteorite ore encircled by a pattern resembling the eye of the fell god. This is quite the fascinating clue. Meteorite ore is associated with the cosmos and gravity sorcery, while the fell god's eye motif ties to the fire giants. It possibly suggests the tower's construction drew on primordial materials and icons predating the Golden Order. The presence of that fiery eye pattern hints that the tower may incorporate remnants of the giant civilization, or were built atop sites sacred to the fell god. It's even possible the Golden Order repurposed older foundations for their new purpose of housing great runes. Another interpretation of the meteorite core is that these chunks of fallen star were used as power sources or anchors even. Perhaps gravity magic keeps the tower stable or slows the passage of time around the runes. Though the inconsistency in design might then stem from local adaptation. Each tower was built by different regional forces using whatever techniques and materials they had, so long as it met the requirements set by the Central Order. Consider the differences. Limgrave and Lanedale's towers are intact and accessible by wide bridges. Their interiors are straightforward. Liurnia's Divine Tower, by contrast, is broken and hidden, accessible only via the magical Carian Study Hall inversion. There are no Two Fingers active atop Liurnia's tower at all. Instead, it holds the curse mark of death on Ronnie's discarded body. This anomaly can be explained by politics. Liurnia's Academy and Carian royalty did not fully submit to the Golden Order authority. They likely sabotaged or repurposed their Divine Tower. The Divine Tower of West Altus, for Rykard's rune, is similarly sealed behind an illusory wall in a mining tunnel, almost as if the Golden Order tried to hide it away. Fitting, since Lord Rykard was a heretic who turned against the Erdtree. By contrast, East Altus Tower for Morgoth and Mohg stand proud over Lanedale's outskirts but required Morgoth's seal to open, reflecting the Golden Order's control. Then there's the remote, isolated Divine Tower, which rises from the sea, accessible only via a gateway. It holds Melania's Great Rune, so why isolate this one? It could possibly be because Malenia and Miquella had removed themselves to the Erdtree, far from the capital's reach, so their tower was forlorn rock, or even intended for Miquella's rune originally, and only Malenia's ended up there when Miquella created his own Erdtree ward instead. The unknown origin of the towers is even acknowledged in academic lore. Their origin and purpose remain unknown, says one scholar, noting only the structural commonalities and that each hosts a pair of dormant two fingers at the top. The inconsistency then can be chalked up to the different circumstances of each demigod and their relationship to the Order. Where the Order's hold was strong, Limgrave and Langdell, the towers are straightforward and well-maintained. Where there was resistance or unusual events, Liurnia's secretiveness and Caelid's devastation by rot, the towers are broken, hidden, or magically sealed. They reflect the chaotic fallout of the Shattering. Another factor is the interference of the Godskin Apostles and other foes of the Golden Order. Many divine towers or their approaches show signs of conflict with the Godskin cult. For instance, the bridge to Liurnia's tower is guarded by a Godskin noble, and Caelid's tower has a Godskin Apostle found deep within. This suggests the towers may have been attacked or partially destroyed by those who wanted to prevent the restoration of the demigod's power. Or the Godskins being, Godskins, the most likely place to find gods and demigods would be at these nearby towers, so they could skin them. But as such attacks could account for Liurnia's tower being physically damaged, or for parts of other towers being coated in bizarre hardened black rock. So, in summary, they were used as conduits to restore divine power to the great runes. Thus, they drew on ancient designs and magical materials, meteorite ore and giant forged stone, to fulfill this holy function. Their inconsistency stems from the fact that each tower was constructed or reconstructed from older structures, and whether that was under different regional conditions and later subjected to varying degrees of sabotage, secrecy, and neglect. Some stand tall and accessible, testaments to the Golden Order's intent to let worthy tarnished reclaim the runes. Others are hidden behind puzzles or literally in pieces, reflecting the messy reality that not all demigods nor their rivals cooperated with the Order's plan. The divine towers in their grandeur and disrepair tell a silent story of a world struggling to reassemble itself, unified in purpose on paper, but fractured in execution, much like the Elden Ring they are meant to restore. Needle Knight Leda, last of the Erdtree. Within the tales of Shadow of the Erdtree, a figure emerges from the shadows of history. Needle Knight Leda, reputedly the final member of an order of knights sworn to Miquella of the Erdtree. Leda's epithet, Needle Knight, refers to Miquella's famed creation, the unalloyed gold needle, a symbol of resisting Outer God's influence. As such, the Needle Knights were devoted to protecting Miquella's ideals of purifying the world from external corruption. All her compatriots are gone by the time we meet her, which immediately imbues her story with tragedy and zealotry. According to accounts from the realm of Shadow, Leda was personally guided by Miquella into that dark realm alongside a group of his followers. All of them, Leda included, operated under the influence of a powerful charm, compelling absolute loyalty to the Empyrean. In the realm of Shadow, Leda and her fellow knights followed a trail of mysterious crosses left by Miquella, clues in his quest for the Gate of Divinity. This hints that Miquella sought a gateway to true godhood, and he left signs only his devoted could track. The Tarnished encounters Leda near Mohgwyn Palace, at the site of Miquella's slumbering cocoon. In an eerie scene, Leda urges the Tarnished to touch the withered arm inside Miquella's cocoon, a desperate measure to enter the realm of Shadow and chase after her lord. Once in the shadowy land, Leda appears repeatedly as a driven ally for a time. We learn that Miquella's great rune was shattered in those events. The charm binding Leda's comrades was broken. Freed from magical compulsion, some knights began to question their path. But not Leda. Her devotion to Miquella remained unshaken. Instead of welcoming her peers' independence, Leda grew paranoid. She started suspecting disloyalty in anyone whose faith wavered once the charm was gone. Obsessed with ensuring only the truly faithful stayed at Miquella's side, Leda effectively turns Inquisitor. Lore states, Leda sets about ferreting out those she believes undeserving of a place at Miquella's side. She fixates on two targets in particular, Hornsent and Sir Ansbach, fellow knights she deems potential traitors. This marks a dark turn in Leda's character, from loyal knight to fanatical hunter of her own brethren. It's a tragic irony that an order founded on love and fellowship could devolve into this deluded suspicion. If the player chooses, they can intervene, either helping Leda eliminate those she doubts or protecting her would-be victims. Regardless of choices, Leda's paranoia speaks volumes. Even without magical influence, her faith in Miquella is absolute to the point of murderous zeal. Ultimately, however, as the Tarnished pushes deeper toward the Gate of Divinity, Leda crosses our path one final time at the threshold of that goal. By now, she has likely shed the last of her former allies, one way or another, truly making her the final Needle Knight. At this climax, Leda pieces together a realization: the Tarnished is not guided by Miquella's will after all, but by the Erdtree's grace. From Leda's perspective, this makes the player an unwitting agent of the Old Order, a possible threat to Miquella's ascension. Thus, Leda challenges the Tarnished to combat. The ensuing battle is a fierce one. Leda is renowned as a fearless, skillful knight. Legends even say she was so formidable that even someone as powerful as Sir Ansbach respected her prowess. In the end, however, the Tarnished overcomes Leda. She falls along with the remnants of her dream-chasing comrades, whomever was still devoted to Miquella. Leda's background paints a sorrowful picture of devotion turned into self-destruction. We glean that she likely joined the Needle Knights out of genuine admiration for Miquella's kindness, Needle evoking Miquella's golden needle that wards off madness. These knights probably saw themselves as protectors of the vulnerable and foes of the outer gods' meddling. Leda is called the Last Needle Knight, implying her order was prestigious, but nearly wiped out by the time of the DLC's events. Whether they fell during the Shattering or later isn't entirely clear. They could even be in the cocoons that surround the Erdtree in Elfale, but the fact that she and others ended up in Mohg's vicinity suggests they were captured or led astray. Leda herself survived Mohg's dominion, perhaps even infiltrated it, all for the hope of rescuing or following Miquella. That, in and of itself, speaks to an incredible will and skill on her part. Her unwavering faith, even after being freed from charm, also reveals much about Miquella. The young lord's ability to inspire devotion was so great that people like Leda needed no enchantment to love him. Yet that love, pure and radiant, could become terrifying in its intensity. As another character, Sir Ansbach, bitterly observes, Leda exemplified the double-edged nature of Miquella's influence, immensely inspiring, but potentially blinding. In chasing her lost saint through waking and dream, Leda lost sight of the very ideals of mercy that Miquella embodied. By the time of her final duel, she is a tragic figure, the loyal knight who became a fanatical avenger, slaying those she deemed impure. In sum, Needle Knight Leda's background enriches the lore around Miquella's secret activities in the shadow of the Erdtree. Through her, we see a glimpse of what Miquella's followers endured, secret missions into unseen realms, conflicts of faith once his direct influence waned, and the ultimate question of who gets to stand by a god's side. Leda stood resolute, but alone at the end, the last of her kind. Her story remains partly unsolved. We have her actions, but not the inner thoughts that led her to kill comrades. Was she horrified at the charm's control and overcorrected? Did she believe a prophecy that only the truest believers would reach the divine gate? Those answers died with her, and what remains is the legend of the final Needle Knight, whose needlepoint devotion to Miquella stitched a path of both reverence and ruin. Gurranq is trying to contain escaped death. At first glance, Gurranq, the beast clergyman in Caelid, might seem like just a feral brute addicted to deathroot. He growls for more and attacks you in madness after feeding him enough. But this theory reinterprets Gurranq's behavior. he isn't mindlessly consuming death. He's desperately attempting to gather and contain the fragments of death that spilled out when Godwyn died. In other words, Gurranq, who is revealed to be Malekith in disguise, is trying to atone for his great failure, the escape of destined death, by eating all the death root he can and thereby locking death back inside himself. It's a futile, tragic attempt to put the genie back in the bottle, so to speak. But let's connect the dots here. Malekith, the Black Blade, was Queen Marika's shadow and keeper of the Rune of Death. Long ago, after defeating the Gloam-eyed Queen, Malekith had the destined death rune sealed in his blade and within his own body. That act is what enabled the Golden Order's age. No one could die a true death, and demigods became immortal so long as the rune was contained. But on the night of the Black Knives, a fragment of that rune was stolen. Malekith's failure to guard it led to Godwyn's murder and the outbreak of Deathroot. Malekith's title thereafter, tellingly, is Death of the Demigods, for he killed the demigods' immortality, in a sense. It's implied Malekith felt deep shame for this. Now, Gurranq is Malekith incognito, a bestial form he took, isolating himself in the bestial sanctum. When you meet Gurranq, he's fixated on one thing, Deathroot. He wolfs down these naughty shards voraciously. Deathroot, as established, is the physical blight steaming from Godwyn's half-death. It's literally the Rune of Death's power spreading through roots from Godwyn. Every time you give Gurranq a Deathroot, he consumes it and rewards you with bestial incantations drawn from that death power. This suggests he's trying to internalize the Deathroot, possibly to remove it from the world by devouring it. After a few feeds, he recoils and says that there's something else, but the death yet quenches, and that he needs more. In a moment of lucidity, almost as if he tastes more than just roots, maybe even the lingering soul of Godwyn, or the echo of destined death's power. But the most telling moment is when Gurranq goes berserk after the fourth Deathroot. He attacks us violently, but upon regaining himself, he mentions that his appetite, his sin, won't be forgotten again, and that this sin should not be touched by the hand of man. These statements are quite loaded. My sin clearly refers to the event of destined death escaping, the sin Malekith committed by failing his duty. Gurranq feels consuming Deathroot is his burden alone. It's not to be touched by man. And he doesn't want anyone else dealing with Deathroot. That's why D, the Hunter of the Dead, merely collects it to feed to Gurranq. Gurranq sees it as his penance to devour all of it, probably in hopes that if he holds all that death inside him, no one else can misuse it. Remember, Malekith originally held death inside him, quite literally, so perhaps Gurranq is trying to do the same with these scattered husks of Deathroot. However, Deathroot is essentially toxic to him. It drives him into bouts of madness and bloodthirst. He can't stomach the full extent of it. It's a torment. Yet he continues, and after you bring all the Deathroot, he says wearily that he has done all he can, and leaves, still not satisfied. This endless, unsatisfied hunger fits the interpretation of someone trying to contain the uncontainable. The spread of death was way too vast. He couldn't eat Deathroot forever, and it might still sprout anew somewhere else. In game terms, even after giving all 9 Deathroots available, the Deathroot still exists in lore, and there's likely more out there. But when you finally meet Malekith and Farum Azula, if you completed Gurranq's feeding, Malekith recognizes you and laments why you would betray him, likely addressing the Tarnished taking destined death now, and he's notably less hostile initially. In either case, Malekith and Gurranq's ultimate stand is trying to prevent destined death from being freed again. In the boss fight's second phase, he unleashes the full Rune of Death from his blade, as if saying, if you want it, you'll get it the hard way. Even the Beast Clergyman's boss intro suggests Malekith was prayerful, not just bloodthirsty. He was guarding the rune till the very end. Critics of this whole theory, though, might say Gurranq just lost himself to the taste of Deathroot, that he's more like an addict or a beast drawn to the power of death, rather than a conscious savior. But the fact that he refers to it as my sin, in the context of who he is, strongly indicates a purpose behind the hunger. He isn't enjoying Deathroot, he's practically punishing himself with it. If he was merely corrupted by it, he wouldn't speak of sin or tell you to stop giving it to him at one point. Those flashes of regret and refusal show a mind at work, not a mindless craving. Gurranq's obsession is laced with remorse and duty. It frames his consumption not as gluttony, but as a grim responsibility he's taken on. So in essence, Malekith in the guise of Gurranq is trying to hunt down and ingest every shard of death. He does all this to make up for failing to guard the rune. It's a noble effort, but tragically hopeless. Death has permeated the world beyond what one troubled beast priest can devour, and the fact that he's never satiated, never cleansed, and ultimately still fails, since we claim the rune of death from him, underscores the sadness of this all. Malekith, the once mighty shadow, is reduced to gnawing on cold roots in a distant shrine. In a vain attempt to put death back in its cage, he's containing what he can, but even he knows it's not enough. The best he can do is delay the inevitable unbinding of destined death, which, come the player's actions, arrives despite all. In a world where so many characters seek to exploit death, Gurranq stands out as the one trying to rein it in, making his story one of tortured heroism rather than mere monstrosity. Hewg and the forgotten god-slaying weapons, a smith's eternal task. In the depths of the Round Table hold, the gentle clanging of a hammer on steel echoes endlessly. Smithing master Hewg, the misbegotten blacksmith bound in chains, toils ceaselessly on an impossible task to forge a weapon that can kill a god. Long ago, Queen Marika herself decreed this duty. Lore tells us that Marika cursed Hewg under the Golden Order to create a weapon capable of slaying a god. Thus, Hewg was imprisoned in the hold for eternity, endlessly honing the armaments of all tarnished who pursued the Elden Ring. This backstory, of course, immediately raises questions. Why would Marika, the eternal goddess, want a god-slaying weapon? The phrasing suggests Marika foresaw a need to kill an immortal, perhaps even to destroy the Greater Will's vassal, the Elden Beast, or herself. Hewg's endless labor is one of Marika's many secret contingencies. His very greeting reveals his resignation.
I'm trapped by the hold, undying, smithing for you fools. That's all there is to it.
Despite his bitter humor, Hewg shows no hatred for the Tarnished. In fact, he is devoted to aiding them. His mantra is that your kind are meant to challenge the demigods and their god, and as long as you do, he will continue to smith weapons. This unwavering purpose consumes him. Over the course of our journey, we witness Hewg's tragic degradation. After the Erdtree is set ablaze, the Round Table hold begins to burn, and Hewg's binding chains finally break. Yet he refuses to leave his forge. He keeps hammering away, even as ash and flame fall around him. When asked why, he responds with the same refrain.
You came to challenge the demigods and their god. I will always smith your weapons. It is what I wish, to smith a weapon for you, to slay a god.
His entire existence has been defined by this single task. At times, within the Round Table hold, we can find Hewg offering a prayer.
Your divinity, have mercy and grant me forgiveness. The road is yet long. A god is not easily felled, but one day, without fail, you will have your wish. So please, grant me forgiveness, Queen Marika.
It's a heartbreaking scene. This loyal smith prays for forgiveness from Marika, even as he continues to forge. But in the end, he doesn't flee or save himself. Instead, he apologizes for not yet fulfilling her command. We never actually see a unique god-slaying weapon item emerge from Hewg's work. Symbolically, the armaments he hones for the player become the tools to fell gods. By the story's climax, the Tarnished uses any weapon, be it a humble dagger or a famed blade, to slay Radagon and the Elden Beast, empowered in part by Hewg's upgrades. In a sense, Hewg's purpose is fulfilled through the Tarnished. This is bittersweet. The weapon to kill a god wasn't a singular legendary sword, but the collective sharpening of all of our blades and skills thanks to Hewg's craft. Fittingly, Hewg's dear friend, Radahn, the spirit tuner, makes a last request once Hewg's wits begin to fail. She asks the player to use the weapons Hewg strengthened to slay Queen Marika and finally put the old smith's soul at ease. Radahn understands that only by ending the misguided divinity of Marika, the very god who cursed Hewg, will his obligation be truly fulfilled. The forgotten god-slaying weapon, thus, isn't an artifact we can find in-game, but a grand concept and a testament to Marika's long game. Marika created the Tarnished, with Godfrey being the first, and armed them via Hewg, perhaps knowing one day a Tarnished would confront the gods themselves. In effect, Marika embedded a subversive kill switch within her own order. Hewg's story casts Marika in an ambiguous light. Was she contrite or far-sighted enough to engineer her own potential downfall? After all, she herself shattered the Elden Ring. So perhaps Hewg was imprisoned shortly before the shattering, or he could have been a long-standing smith for the Golden Order. Regardless, we only have inferences. And again, that's not even to speak of the god-slaying weapon, or weapons in this case. In fact, the weapon could have been meant for a different god even, like the Greater Will's Beast, or even an outer god. The item descriptions and dialogues firmly establish this scenario. Marika bound Hewg to this task ages ago, and he labored eternally until a Tarnished came along to put his work to use. It's a rare instance of Chekhov's gun in Elden Ring's lore that is never explicitly shown firing, yet we feel its result when the final god falls. In the end, Hewg remains at his melting anvil, memory gone, still mumbling that his weapons need to slay a bloody god. His weapons live on only through the Tarnished's victory. This unsung hero's plight underscores the hidden threads Marika wove, and the tragic devotion of those caught in them. Hewg's fate leaves us pondering Marika's true intentions. Did she ever truly want the order she created to endure? Or did she always plan for her impure elements, the misbegotten smith and the Tarnished exiles, to topple the very gods? Or did she simply lose her mind when Godwyn was murdered, thus in turn causing the shattering? These answers lie buried in silent characters like Hewg, who without complaint served a grand, secret purpose until the very end. Radagon was forged to preserve order. One of Elden Ring's biggest twists is that Queen Marika the Eternal and her male consort Radagon are the same being. Yet, when Marika shatters the Elden Ring, Radagon tries desperately to repair it. This isn't just a symbolic duality of male and female aspects, it's an outright split in purpose. Marika's half destroys the Golden Order, while Radagon's half remains loyal to it. So why would one god have two wills in conflict? This theory proposes that Radagon was forged as a construct or counterpart specifically to preserve the Golden Order when Marika lost faith. Supporting evidence comes from the Mimic Tier lore. The Mimic Tier ashes describe how the Nox of Nokron attempted to forge a lord, creating a being that could imitate a person's form but not their independent will. In other words, a mimic can look exactly like you, but it won't necessarily choose as you would. This parallel to Radagon is quite striking, honestly. Radagon and Marika share a body, but they don't share the same will. Radagon's behavior aligns with a being designed to stabilize and correct the order. He's associated with Golden Order fundamentalism, the branch of scholarship and incantations that emphasizes order and regression. In fact, as consort to Marika, Radagon studied and refined Golden Order incantations, embodying the role of an enforcer of order and purity. His famous law of regression incantation literally reveals truth by reverting forms, and by using this spell that we learn Radagon is Marika in-game. All of this suggests Radagon functions as more than just Marika's masculine side. He appears purpose-built to keep the system running. We see it in the pivotal moment at the Elden Ring. Marika rebels and shatters the ring, but Radagon tried to repair the Elden Ring with the same hammer used to shatter it. He fails and is punished alongside Marika, but the intent is quite clear. Radagon would not let the Order die. This theory doesn't insist Radagon is literally a mimic tier. There's no jar of silver goo here after all, but it suggests a design logic. The Greater Will or the Two Fingers might have created Radagon or repurposed an existing champion as a kind of failsafe, a forged guardian of order to counter Marika's potential defiance. You know, maybe they knew all along that Marika would rebel at some point. So it would explain why one god has two wills. Marika became disillusioned with the Golden Order, so Radagon was activated to make sure the Order endured even if Marika rebelled. However, detractors of this theory say that Marika and Radagon are simply a mythical embodiment of two as one, like alchemical twins. They argue that the game only intends them to be one god with dual aspects and not some sort of a science experiment. But even if that's true on a literal level, it fails to explain the timing of their conflict. Why does Radagon surface exactly when Marika acts against the Greater Will? Two aspects of one god describes what they are, but not why they came to oppose each other in that moment. By viewing Radagon as essentially a constructed will, a being whose purpose is to preserve the Golden Order, we gain a convincing answer. Radagon exists to save the system once Marika no longer would. It's worth noting as well that at one time Radagon went to war against the Carians. So it's a wonder as well how long Radagon had been around at that point, and if he even ever had any control of his own life. You know, like some transcendental entity or law controlling him, like a hand above. But references aside, this theory fits the broader motif in the lore that entities can be created to fulfill specific lordly roles. Radagon was Marika's consort, but perhaps by design, he was also her failsafe, kicking in when she jeopardized the Order. Why were trolls reintegrated instead of exterminated? In the aftermath of the war against giants, the fate of the trolls took a very different turn than that of their fire giant cousins. Trolls are actually the lesser descendants of the ancient fire giants, smaller in stature but intelligent and skilled in smithing. During the war, these trolls famously betrayed their fire giant kin and sided with Queen Marika's forces, tipping the scales in favor of the Erdtree. In reward for this fealty, Marika furnished the defecting trolls with gilded greatswords to honor their service. This pivotal act ensured that the trolls were spared from genocide, unlike the fire giants who were nearly wiped out, with only one cursed survivor tending the flame. The trolls earned a place, however humble, in the new order of the Erdtree. After Marika's victory, the trolls were not celebrated as heroes, despite their contribution. Instead, they were gradually integrated into society in subservient roles. Marika and Godfrey's regime saw fit to use trolls as beasts of burden, miners, and shock troops, rather than exterminate them. Many trolls became mere pets of the Golden Order, dragging massive coffin carriages across the lands between, or laboring in mines once their wits began to dull. Although, much of the Golden Order probably saw them as hulking brutes with nary a brain cell to begin with. But this reintegration was practical. Trolls were tremendously strong and resilient, making them useful labor and battlefield assets. It was also symbolic, a living reminder of Marika's mercy to those who bent the knee. Having switched sides in the war, the Trolls' continued existence advertised the Erdtree's dominance and Marika's capacity to subsume former enemies rather than simply destroy them. Although we know this isn't always the case, given the fate of the merchants. But, crucially, the Trolls' own cultural traits eased their absorption. They had a history of performing divine smithing with braided stone hammers, and thus slotted naturally into roles like blacksmithing. One of the best examples, of course, is seen with Iji, as he can help forge our weapons. Additionally, some even became fully fledged knights in service to human factions. For example, the Carian royal family, heirs to the astrologers, invoked an ancient pact with the Trolls during Liurnia's wars, and with this, enchanted troll knights fought alongside Rennala's sorcerers to repel the Golden Order's invasion. Thus, by demonstrating loyalty and usefulness to their new overlords, the Trolls secured a tenuous if unpleasant place in the Erdtree's age. Although, one thing is still completely uncertain, and that is, what exactly is the stone tablet located in their abdomens? Many people see it as some sort of a control that Marika had bestowed upon them. Maybe this helped rein them in? It's definitely something that's never spoken about in any item descriptions. So, in that regard, we're completely in the dark. But, to sum everything up, the Trolls were spared extermination because they defected to the winning side. They proved too valuable to waste. Their strength and smithing knowledge made them assets the Golden Order could harness. Yet, their reward was servitude. This is kind of a running theme in past FromSoft games. Whereas in Dark Souls, there are many giants that are kept as blacksmiths or even defense mechanisms like in Sen's Fortress. So the Trolls being used here is honestly nothing new. But in the land of the Erdtree, their champions never truly trusted these giant kin, so Trolls were kept on tight leashes as slave labor or frontline shock troops, rather than granted any honor. It's a tragic fate. The Trolls bought their survival with betrayal, only to be chained in a life of indignity. Still, this was preferable to the utter annihilation visited upon the fire giants. By integrating the Trolls, the Golden Order eliminated a potential rebellious remnant and gained hardy servants all in one stroke. Thus, the Trolls endure, a conquered people bound in gilded irons, living relics of a war long past. Spared from death, but condemned to a life of toil beneath the very order they helped establish. The secret vow of Radahn and Miquella, promised consort of a new age. One of Elden Ring's most startling DLC revelations is that Star Scourge Radahn, the mighty red-maned general of Caelid, had long ago promised to become the consort of Miquella, the prodigious, unalloyed gold child and half-brother to Radahn. This bombshell recontextualizes the history of the demigods. Two of the supposedly rival offspring of Radagon and Marika were, in secret, allies working toward a common dream. But what exactly was the nature of their vow, and why would proud Radahn, a son of Rennala and celebrated conqueror of the stars, agree to serve as lord for Miquella's future godhood? Much of this point remained shrouded in mystery, with only fragments of dialogue and item descriptions to guide us. What we do know is that Miquella, despite his eternal youth, was astoundingly charismatic and intelligent. He sought to create a new order, a gentler world free of suffering, where curses like Millennia's rot could be cured. As an Empyrean chosen by the Two Fingers, Miquella was on track to succeed Marika as god. In pursuing this, he understood he'd need a consort as an Elden Lord of his own when he eventually established a new age. His eyes turned to Radahn, his older half-brother, known for strength and martial honor. But why Radahn? Well, Radahn was the mightiest hero of that generation, a demigod who learned gravity magic to hold back the stars and revered his battlefield code. Crucially, Radahn was also someone who admired loyalty and perhaps had compassion beneath his warrior exterior. After all, he kept his childhood pet Leonard, the horse, and learned sorcery to keep riding him, a surprisingly tender detail for a hulking knight. Perhaps Miquella likely sensed that Radahn, despite fighting for the Golden Order as one of the Shard Bearers, might be won over by a noble cause. According to newly revealed memory fragments, Miquella approached Radahn with an offer. "Lord brother, I'm going to be a god. If we honor our part of the vow, promise me you'll be my consort. I'll make the world a gentler place." These lines, spoken by young Miquella in a vision, show him addressing Radahn as a brother and laying out the terms. Essentially, help me achieve godhood and whatever conditions that entails, and, in return, you shall be my Elden Lord when I remake the world. Radahn apparently agreed, for he is thereafter called Promised Consort in relation to Miquella. Items confirm this. Radahn's very swords in youth are named Great Swords of the Promised Lord and carry a lore note that they were the swords of a lord who does not rely on strength and gravity alone, hinting that Radahn drew on Miquella's light or power as well. It implies Radahn's ambitions became tied to Miquella's even before the shattering. However, the vow demanded something of Miquella and Malenia as well. Clues suggest Radahn wanted to ensure their conviction. The cryptic secret rites scroll from the DLC speaks of a prophecy. A lord will usher in a god's return, and the lord's soul will require a vessel. Scholars interpret this as indicating Radahn, the lord, would have to die and be reborn as part of fulfilling Miquella's ascension. Indeed, events bear this out. Radahn had to be defeated, and his soul separated from his body. During the Battle of Aeonia, when Malenia and Radahn clashed, something remarkable happened. As Malenia triggered the scarlet wrought bloom, she whispered in Radahn's ear, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." This line, found in Radahn's young lion's helm description, confirms that Radahn still upheld the title even on the battlefield. The moment Malenia bloomed, Radahn heard the call of the vow, essentially a reminder that this battle was the key in their arrangement. Radahn did not flee or fully resist the bloom. If anything, he took it knowing it was the necessary outcome, or perhaps knowing his defeat was imminent with the scarlet bloom. He accepted his role in Miquella's plans. As such, Malenia's sacrifice ensured Radahn's demise as a sane demigod. Radahn's subsequent fate, mindlessly rotting, holding back the stars even in madness, was an unintended consequence, but it fulfilled part of the hidden plan. Radahn fell, as was required. The next part of the vow, apparently, was that Miquella would restore Radahn when the time came. In the DLC, after the player bests Radahn's crazed form, Miquella enacts a rite to bring Radahn's soul back in a new body. Miquella addresses Radahn's spirit as "my loyal blade and champion of the festival. Now the vow will be honored, and my lord brother's soul will return, so that he may be my consort." From this, we glean that part of the vow was Malenia and Miquella would defeat Radahn to prove their worth or enact a catalyst, and then Miquella would use his Empyrean power to resurrect Radahn purified, ready to rule by his side. The festival reference is likely Radahn's own festival of combat. Interestingly, Miquella calls Radahn champion of it, suggesting even the Radahn festival was co-opted in this secret scheme. This covert alliance raises many unsolved questions. What exactly moved Radahn to join Miquella? Was it purely Miquella's persuasive vision of a kinder world? Or did Radahn have grievances with the status quo of the Golden Order that made him receptive? Radahn's love for his siblings, as he idolized Godfrey and learned sorcery from an Albanoric mentor to better serve his family, might have extended to little Miquella and Malenia. It's somewhat touching to imagine the giant general treating the forever young Miquella as a cherished kid brother. If Miquella confided in Radahn about the Greater Will's failings, how fundamentalism couldn't cure rot, how the Empyrean system was flawed, Radahn might have agreed that a new order was needed. None of this is confirmed outright, of course. The game leaves their exact motivations to our imagination, but clearly, Radahn was not the unthinking brute some assumed. He was capable of quiet conspiracy in service to something noble. Another mystery posits itself here. What were the exact unspecified terms that Miquella and Malenia had to fulfill for Radahn? The lore implies that defeating Radahn in fair combat was one condition. The fact that Malenia went to war with Radahn, and Radahn awaited her bloom with acceptance, possibly, supports this. There may have been a second condition, however. Radahn's soul needed a new vessel, as per the prophecy. Perhaps Radahn knew he'd have to die and be reborn, cleansed of scarlet rot and other burdens. That, in of itself, is quite a huge leap of faith, essentially trusting Miquella to resurrect him. Radahn's calm demeanor when facing Malenia's bloom suggests he did trust Miquella that much. In his rot-addled madness during the main game, he still held back the stars, possibly an instinctive honoring of his vow, keeping the world stable until Miquella's return. So, now that we know all of this, the entire Radahn versus Malenia conflict gains a new layer. It was not merely two demigods fighting for a great rune, it was also stage of one of a secret plan. Perhaps Mohg's interference with kidnapping Miquella can be seen as kind of an offshoot. Mohg discovered Miquella's importance and tried to hijack it by making Miquella his consort instead. Although Mohg likely didn't know about Radahn's vow, but understood Miquella was about to usher in godhood. Thus, the Night of the Black Knives, the Shattering, all occurred with this hidden subplot in the background, never revealed to the player until much later. The unsolved piece here is how much anyone else knew. Did Marika know of her youngest son's pact with Radahn, the Two Fingers? Unlikely, or they'd have intervened. It seems to have been a pact, sworn in private. By the end of the DLC, presumably, the player thwarts Miquella's plan. But, even in failure, this story leaves behind huge lore questions. What would the world have looked like under Miquella and consort Radahn? We hear Miquella's promise of a gentler order, but no specifics. Maybe a world with no conflict? Would the Erdtree itself remain, or would Miquella have grown a new one entirely from his Hewg tree? He had already demonstrated unprecedented power. Unalloyed gold that repels outer gods, a cocoon where he tried to remake himself. Hell, even enchantments that ensnared an omen like Mohg. Radahn, for his part, was willing to sacrifice everything for this new age. The tragedy is that we never fully see it realized. And something that's additionally awkward is that no ending was added if you wanted to side with Miquella. It's just not a possibility at all. I always thought that was kind of weird. In terms of raw lore, one unsolved element is whether the Greater Will was aware of or countered this vow. The events of the Shattering, especially Radahn and Malenia's mutual defeat, left the lands between in chaos, arguably preventing Miquella's immediate rise. Was that a coincidence or cosmic check? Even Ranni's involvement, stealing destined death, indirectly halted any straightforward path to a new order, until the Elden Ring was mended. In this light, the Radahn-Miquella Pact is a deeply buried subplot, resolved within the DLC, but still raising what-if scenarios about the game's main events. At the end of it all, Radahn and Miquella's vow is one of Elden Ring's biggest lore surprises, and yet still partially opaque. It teaches us that demigods often thought to be monolithic in their loyalties, were making secret alliances. It also reminds us that Miquella, whom we only saw sleeping in the base game, was actively pulling strings long before even winning over a brother who, by all rights, could have been his enemy. The exact details of their pact, what trials were agreed upon, what the new age entailed, remain teasingly out of reach, gleaned only through snippet quotes and implications. It's a testament to From Software's storytelling that, even after confronting these characters, their shared dream remains a beautiful mystery, an unwritten chapter of history that we can only envision. Radahn, the mighty lion of war, and Miquella, the gentle yet iron-willed Empyrean, nearly changed the course of the world with a single promise between brothers. The full truth of that promise is a mystery we're left to ponder, its secrets perhaps known only to the stars that Radahn held in immediate pause for so long.